Let's start by doing a quick rundown over the entire project and see exactly what we're going to be creating. And we can start here at the SOP level where we have our character. So if we go inside the character geometry container, this is just a simple USD import. So all of the files provided will be in USD format, and you can download everything, including the render files and assets that we're going to be using, and also the completed project file in case you get stuck, so you can check it out and see exactly how I build everything. So this will be our character with a simple walk animation. And if I go up, we have our effects containers over here. So the first one will be for our cloth. If I step inside, we can see the final result will be this Vellum simulation of the cloth with some wind pushing our cloth in this left to right direction, which will also be the same direction for all of the other layers as well. We can see that this isn't really a huge network here. This is a pretty simple simulation, but there are a few tips and tricks we're going to discuss here. And not only for this cloth simulation, but for all of the layers, we're going to discuss a lot of different setups and shortcuts that we can take to achieve a very art directable result. All right, so this will be our cloth. Let's go up. Let's go into our effects shirt. So we are going to grab the shirt from our character and we are going to simulate this as well. We are going to do a very interesting thing here, which is to use the ripple solver to generate sort of like this wind passing through our cloth. So we can see that we're not really using any collision and everything is driven by this ripple solver. We can go to the file cache here and we can preview the result, which looks something like this. So this will be pretty fun to set up. Let's go up and let's go forward to our smoke and dust elements. And again, this is, we can see for our pyro, this is a very simple setup. Let's preview the result. So here it is, just some smoke blowing from the side, driven by mostly wind and turbulence. And over here to the right, we have our dust setup, which is going to be particles advected by this wind velocity. And we are going to scatter a bunch of small rocks. So let's maybe close in on one of these. It's really just a simple sphere with some noise applied to generate sort of like a small rock, and this will be our dust layer. So this is pretty much all we are going to do into SOPs. The setups themselves are pretty simple, but like I said, I'm also going to show you a lot of cool tips and tricks to optimize the setups and sort of cheat with a lot of these simulations to get them to work exactly how we need them. And then we are also going to render everything in Solaris, so I'm going to cover the entire workflow. If I go inside this SOP context and hold down N, I can jump to the LOPS context from over here. This is really handy to do. We can jump to LOPS and then we can jump back to the object level if we want. So we can see that this is pretty fast, and this is usually the way I prefer working. Now here in the stage context, we are going to recreate this entire chain. We can see that this again isn't really such a big network here because we only have a few elements. So we are going to bring in our camera and then we are going to layer our character with all of the effects simulated, so the shirt and the cape. And we are also going to create the material for the cape directly inside of Solaris with material X. So we'll also take a look into that. After that, we can layer in our smoke, so our volumes. And then on top of that, we'll bring our dust. Finally, we do some very simple light setup. We can see I'm just using a physical sky and a distant light, doing some camera adjustments here. And then we are going to split all of the layers that we are going to render. So we'll have 4 total layers that will export over to Nuke. And this will be the Solaris setup. And after we have all of our render layers, we can jump into Nuke. And this is what we are going to be creating over here. We can start all the way at the top. So here we'll have a background smoke. And on top of this, we are going to layer our character. So it's pretty much going to mimic the Solaris setup, if I'm going to be honest. So back over in Nuke, over our character, we're going to layer our foreground smoke like so. Then we are going to bring in the eyes, where we are going to do some glow and a little bit of optical flare effect here. And then over this, we'll bring in our dust, which is the final layer. And finally, we'll do some grading, post-processing, and also the final crop to give this that cinematic anamorphic look. And this will be the comp. So again, we are going to explore a bunch of different tips and tricks. So for example, for our character, if I look at this, I'm going to show you a way that we can get a Fresnel pass going by exporting some custom AOVs from Houdini. We are also going to layer some custom scratches on top of our armor directly inside of Nuke. And we are going to explore a bunch of tricks like this to really fine-tune the final render. And now, since we are in Nuke, if I press S and go to my project settings, we can go to the color tab and we can see that the color management here is set to OCIO. And the default option here for the OCIO config is going to be this ACES. And you can see this because it's off screen, but the default config here is this ACES 1.2 or whatever the latest version of ACES you are using. But you can see here that I have a different config, which is this Houdini config. And this is the configuration that I grabbed from the Houdini folder. So if you go to your documents folder, inside your Houdini folder where you have the packages and all of the configurations, you will have this OCIO folder, and I grabbed this config from here. So this is the configuration that Houdini uses by default. And really all I did is just point the configuration file to this file over here. So we can see that this is an OCIO format, and this will mean that I'm gonna get consistent results between what I'm previewing in Houdini with Karma and what I'm going to import into Nuke. And if I go step over to Houdini and inside Solaris, let's go to any one of these layers, and I just want to show you how to set this up. So if I press Shift R, so we can go inside the render view, we can see that as I look at this render, and if I look at the file that I've exported or rather imported into Nuke, so this base file over here, we have the same result. Now it's not really the same frame. Let's go to 1054 here as well, just so it's consistent. All right, so we can look at this, and then we look at this as well, so we can see we have exactly the same colors. Now in Houdini, there's a few things that we have to do here, and if we go to where it says Karma over here at the top, we can turn on this color correction toolbar, which is off by default. So let's make sure that this is turned on. And the default color space here, if we look at this drop down, the default setting here is going to be Lut and Gamma. So this is what it looks like, and this is the basic version without any high dynamic range colors. So let's make sure that we are using Open Color IO over here, and this option for sRGB display will be fine, but this option where it says Untone Map, this refers to the configuration that I've imported into Nuke over here. So for example, if you want to work in the regular ACES color space, let's switch this over to ACES 1.2, we see that everything is a little bit darker, but we still have high dynamic color ranges. And if I were to switch over to Houdini, we can also set this to be the regular ACES configuration. So I can turn this on, and we can see now that it looks like this version over here. So this is something important to take into account right as you start the project to make sure that you're working in the correct color space from the start. So I'm going to switch this back to the default Untone map, and this is the config that I'm going to be using, but like I said, you can use the regular ACES as well. And one final thing to take into account here, we have to go to the edit settings and OCIO settings over here, and we have to make sure that our EXR files here are exported in the ACES CG color space. So by default, I think this was set to one of these other settings. So I think the default is set to sRGB texture. Let's just make sure that we are exporting in this ACES CG color space. And again, this is to ensure that whatever we are seeing here, we'll see in Nuke as well. So we can actually now start building the project from scratch, and we can start directly inside of Solaris to bring all of the assets that we need. So let's go ahead, and I will just recreate the entire chain over here to the right. I will start with a sublayer and just bring in the camera. I can also rename this to camera or cam. So let's point our file to the camera USD layer. So this is what's included in the downloads. Let's go ahead and bring this up, and I will duplicate the sublayer over here to the right, and let's bring in our character. Let's point this first. We'll go inside our care base, and we have this care base USD. Let's start with this, and this is the character without any animations applied to it. So this has all of the look dev already done here. So we have all of the material assignments and everything we need. In fact, we can go ahead, and if I were to just drop down a physical sky just real quick so we can preview this, if I press Shift R, we should see all of our materials. so we don't have to worry about recreating all the materials and all that boring stuff. Now we can go ahead and let's merge our camera with our character. And because I want to see my scene graph, I will switch to my Solaris context, which is kind of the same setup as the regular Solaris desktop here. The only difference is that I place the scene graph tree and the scene graph details over to the side, so it's more vertical, just because it kind of makes more sense to me this way. So let's go back to our chain here, and we can already see what we have. So our camera and the character with all of the mesh components and our material components. And from here, what we can do is simply sublayer our animation. So this is a separate file. Let's drop another sublayer under our character, and I can even rename this to anim, and we'll go ahead and point to our char.walk.usd, and we can see this is the benefit of the USD workflow, is we can now essentially replace the animation without losing any of our look depth. So if I press Shift R, we'll still have all of the material assignments and all the settings from our character base file. And this animation layer by itself, this character walk.usd, is only containing our mesh information. So it's basically just replacing all of these mesh components here with their animated versions. Okay, so let's also check to see that our camera is working. So we have our camera, and we can also let's just drop a physical sky for now, because we are going to need this later anyway. Down a merge from here, and let's preview the result. Actually, let's also drop down a Karma render settings, because we are also going to need a few of these layers, and we can set this to Karma XPU. I believe all of the layers I rendered by using the XPU engine, so not the regular CPU, but you can use the CPU version if you want. Let's make sure that our camera is pointing to our cam2, and you can also decide on the output path that you want over here. For the resolution, we are also going to use 1080p. And I can close this for now, and let's go to our Karma XPU render view. All right, so this is kind of working. The reason that this is blurry is because we have to set the focus point for our camera. So let's go ahead, press Shift R to cancel the render. Let's drop down and edit camera here right at the end, and we'll point to our cam2 for primitives. And we can go to sampling, and we will have to animate our focus distance to match the character as it's moving forward. So if I go outside in the perspective window and I turn on my grid, our camera is roughly 19 units away from our character when he starts to walk, because he's starting the walk at origin here at 0, 0, 0. And also the animation, we can see that we are working with the frame range 1001 to 1120 at the end. And also, if I check this animation, we see that we have around 50 frames of pre-roll, and this is for the cloth simulation mainly. So the ranges that I'm going to work with is going to be from 950 to 1120, but we are only going to render from frame 1001. Let's also maybe hide the lights in our viewport. So we start at the origin here with our animation, and our camera is, like I said, around 19 units apart. So let's go to our focus distance here. Let's set or create. We'll set the distance here to 19, add a keyframe with Alt and left click, and we'll move further away, and we are going to scroll the timeline, and let's go right at the end, add the last frame, so 1120, and we can actually press enter in our viewport to also see our focal point. And since this is an animated value now, I can just simply drag this over here until it matches with our character. So let's make sure that the focus remains on the character. This will automatically add a keyframe now that I move this in the viewport for this value of 315. Let's also shift click this value so we can look at our keyframe. So I can press F, and by default it creates this Bezier interpolation. Let's grab the keyframes and set this to a linear interpolation, and now essentially the focus should follow our character, and it does. So if I go back inside the camera view and press Shift R, now we should no longer see this blurriness. Of course, our sky is blurry in the back, but we don't really have to worry about sky because we are not gonna render this. So I can actually just go to the physical sky and turn off render light geometry. Okay, so we are off to a good start. We can now focus on the simulations. So let's go ahead, cancel the render here with Shift R, go back to our object view, and I'm actually going to set this back to my build desktop here. And now we are at the sub level. Let's just ignore all of these layers for now. Maybe we can keep the LOP import camera. So this brings our camera from the stage context over to subs. So all we have to do here is, if I go back to LOPs, we can grab this cam sublayer, press Ctrl C, go back to object, and the LOP should be pointing to our cam sublayer, and the primitive we actually have to grab from over here, but we can see we have this slash cam2, so this will be our primitive path, and we just have to make sure that this matches. So now we have our camera at the sub level as well. Let's go ahead and drop down a geocontainer, and we will import our character. So we'll name this to import char, and we'll do a USD import, and let's bring in only our walk animation because we only need the geometry, so we're not interested in all of the other material assignments and stuff like that. And let's also unpack, and let's keep this as primitive so we can later select our shirt and disconnect it from our character. So we'll just do a null here, and this will be our out character. We're not going to do really anything else here. This is mainly just so we can preview our simulated layers on top of our geometry. So when I go up and we create all of the layers, we can jump inside the camera and we can preview how this looks at the sub level and get a better idea on how it's also going to look when it's rendered. So we are going to start with our cloth. So let's do a geocontainer. I'll rename this to fx_cloth, and let's step inside. Let's do another USD import, and we'll bring in our character. Okay, so here we have it. And if I also show all objects, so we can see our character. Now, obviously, this cloth isn't animated. We can see that as I go to the first frame, so in this case, the animation starts at 950 with those 50 frames of pre-roll. If I go to the beginning, let's maybe reset our viewport or go up. Here we can see that the cloth is right on top of our character, and we can start working on the simulation. So let's go back inside, and we want to unpack this as well, and we'll just unpack this to polygons directly. So now we can access all of our polygons and we can do proper simulation. Now we'll also need to collide with our character, so we can go up and let's grab our character from over here, and I will press Ctrl C, and we'll just object merge this here. And for this, we'll also need to unpack this so we have access to all of the polygons. Otherwise, the collisions won't work because this is still packed primitives, as we can see here, packed USDs. So let's drop an unpack, and let's also drop a convert. And now we have access to all of the individual polygons, as we can see. So for our cloth, we could pretty much simulate this directly on our character. So for example, if I drop down a Vellum configure cloth, this will be our first input, and our third input, the collision, will point to our convert here. Let's maybe drop down a null, and let's rename this to geocall for geometry collision. This node will configure all of our Vellum settings for us. So here we can configure stretch and bend settings that determine how the cloth moves, but we will leave these settings at their default values for now. And let's just place this inside a Vellum solver right away and see what we get. And with most Vellum simulations, you will probably need to increase the substeps. So let's just increase this to a value of 3 for now. And let's press play and see what we get. So I'm going to let this run for a few frames and check the result. Okay. So if I preview this, we can see right away that the cloth is quite stretchy. Now we can probably fix this when we increase the substeps. So I believe the final value here for the substeps will be around 5, which will sort of deter a little bit of this stretchiness. But as I preview this, we can see that the cloth for the most part sticks pretty good for our character, which is what I'm looking for. But when we are going to add the wind, we are going to have some trouble holding the cloth onto our character, especially around this hood area, around the head here. Now, for the cloth settings that I used, if I go to the Vellum constraints option here, for the bend, I used a lower value here, so we can see we have this very low value here, 0.0001. So I just went one step below the default value to this value over here. So this will mean that it's easier to deform, and this will create more wrinkles, and the cloth will have more features. One other way that we can dampen some of this stretchiness here is to increase this damping ratio here for our bend. So I usually always like to increase this one just because it makes the simulations a little bit more stable from what I found. And in this case, this is a very sensitive value as well. I just use a damping ratio here of 0.02. And for the most part, I left all of the other settings as they are. Let's also add our wind, so we can step inside the Vellum solver and we'll drop down a pop wind and attach it to our force output. And for the wind settings that I used, I set the wind velocity, so this is the direction. I set this to 1, 0, and 1, which is going to be 1 on this x direction and 1 in this z direction. So the resulting vector will be this diagonal vector that points in both directions. And for wind speed, I used a value of 1.5, and I just increased the amplitude here, so this will add some noise to our wind. I just increased this to 1, and the rest of the settings, I left them as they are. So if I go up and preview this result, let's see what we get. Now this is still currently a little bit too stretchy, but like I said, this will be tapered down by increasing the substeps. And also, if you want the geometry to hold together more tightly, you can increase the constraint iteration as well. You can try a value of 150 if you think the cloth is too stretchy. So let's leave this to simulate for a few more frames and see how it holds up when the character starts to walk. Okay, so now that we have quite a bit of frames here to work with, we can check the simulation, and I'm pretty okay with it for the most part. Now, right away, what I'm noticing here is that as my character moves forward, the hood part here starts to fall off. It starts to gradually pull back on the head here, and if I simulate further, we can see that it eventually falls off almost entirely. So we will need to force our hood part to stick with our geometry, and also we can force some other parts. We can make sure that some of this shoulder over here to the side and maybe over here to the waist as well, we can also attach these points to make sure that the cloth doesn't have any unexpected behavior. Now, what I want to showcase here, if I look through the camera and I play this animation for a bit, we can see that this cloth here in the front is a little bit too static, and this is because if we preview it from the side, as our wind is pushing the cloth in this direction, so diagonally, and our character is moving forward, and when our character moves forward, it sort of negates, as we can see here, it negates this direction that we want for our cloth. So as a result, it kind of sticks to the geometry quite a bit, and this is again because the character is being translated forward, and we can see that we have a lot of collision action going on here, even though we have quite a strong wind. So I want to somehow have the wind affect our cloth, but not worry about this collision that's happening because our character is moving forward. And what we can do is we can cancel the translation of our character mesh without losing the walk-in animation, simulate the cloth in this state, and then apply the translation back after we create the simulation. So what I mean by this is if we go to our geometry collision here, let's maybe make some room. So from our convert, I can do an extract centroid, which will give me a point right in the center of our geometry. So if I look at the result here, let's run this over detail. And for method, we can keep this as a center of mass. Now we see we only have 1 point. I think I have to reset my viewport here. So we end up with this 1 point. Let's maybe set the display here to points, and also let's increase the guide here. So I'll set the point size here. Let's increase this to a value of 10. So now this point will represent my geometry. If I template this on top, let's take a look. All right, so here we have it. This point now will always be in the center of our geometry, and we can use the position information from this point to subtract it from the geometry. Now, to make this simpler, we are only interested in the z value of this point. So we can drop down a transform from here and set the scale on the x to 0 and also the scale on the y to 0. So now we only have this z translation. Okay, so we can see that it's perfectly matching our mesh. And now all we have to do is subtract this position. So let's drop down an attribute VOP from our mesh and let's plug our point as the second input. Let's grab the position. So inside from op input 2, let's do an import point attribute. The ptnum, let's promote this to a constant and keep this at 0 because we only have 1 point. And now what we can do is just simply subtract our position with this position, and let's plug this into the P. And as a result, this is what we get. Now our character walks into place, and we still have the position information from our extracted point here. So if let's drop down a null and also rename this to extracted PT. Now to apply back this translation to our static mesh, we can do the same thing with an attribute VOP by adding the position. We can do the same thing to reapply this position. Let's simply duplicate this attribute VOP. So let's rename this to negate P. And let's rename this to add. So it's pretty much the same operation. From our static mesh, we are going to add this value now. So instead of a subtract here, we can drop down and add, and let's add these up, and we should have our original result. So if I preview this now, we can see that there's virtually no difference between where we started. So let's go to our convert here and also look at this, and we can see it's the exact same result. And now the only difference is that we can apply this to our cloth as well. So just for example, I can simply grab the cloth as it is at rest. I plug this inside our attribute VOP operation here with the add. Let's preview this, and let's also preview our character with W. We can see as I scroll back from the beginning, we don't have any simulations, but now this will stick to our character. So hopefully you can tell where I'm going with this. We are going to simulate cloth on this static version of the character, and then after we do our simulation, we will apply back this position that we extracted here. So now when I will simulate this, the wind is always going to be pointing in this direction, and it's always going to be on top of our character and not have the collision of our character moving forward interfere that much with our simulation. So this will be a lot more art directable and a lot easier to work with and get predictable results in terms of simulation. And like I mentioned earlier, we also want to stick some points of this cloth directly to our mesh. We can assign these. Let's go ahead and let's create a group over here after our mesh. Let's set this to point and let's rename the to stick, and we can simply select some points here. Let's grab some over here at the top. Maybe we can select this with our brush selection. So let's set this to brush, and let's make sure that this is only selecting visible objects. So I'll press Shift V, which turns on this select only visible geometry. And let's go ahead and reselect this part over here, maybe some on the shoulder as well. And like I mentioned, maybe on the side here. So let's press enter. This will be our selection. So now we can append a vellum attached to geometry in between here. So after our vellum cloth, we will drop a vellum attached to geometry, plug this here, and let's go to the top. Let's preview the result. We'll go go here for our group type. Let's set this to point, and we'll select our stick group that we created. So we can preview our constraints over here as well. Now, if let's press W to view this in wireframe, we can see that there's quite a bit of a gap here, especially on the side. And this means, so the default settings here, we can see for the rest length scale of 1, this will mean that this distance between the constraints will be kept throughout the simulation. Now I want the cloth to be really close to the geometry, so I can in fact set the rest scale here to 0, and this will mean that when the simulation runs, these points here will snap directly onto our character mesh, and they will be kept there throughout the simulation. So this rest length scale will depend on what kind of look you're going for, but in this case, since our wind is pushing the cloth in this direction, I'm totally fine with having these points stick directly on the surface of our geometry. Alright, so I believe we are now ready to run a final simulation. So back to our Vellum solver, I'll increase the substeps here to 5, and we can just do a file cache. And before we actually save this out and run the final simulation, there's also one thing to take into account here. We are going to need a rest attribute later when we do our shading in Karma. So after our group node over here, let's also drop down a rest position sub and record this rest state where our geometry isn't moving. And I believe now we have all the attributes that we need, and we can go ahead and run a file cache on this. Let's simulate the entire frame range, and I'll just rename this to cloth sim, and we'll press save to disk. So now we can preview our result, and let's also template our geometry, our collision geometry, but the static version. And if I look at this, we can see now as I press play that our geometry, or rather our cloth, isn't intersecting as much with our characters, so it's not getting pushed into our character here. And we can see now that we maintain this gap between the character and the cloth, like over here as well, which wouldn't be possible otherwise, as the cape would be sticking over to this side if the character was also moving forward. So again, this will give us a lot more art directability. Now, it doesn't really make any sense physics-wise, but this is what will look better in our shot. We have a few problems here. We can see that the character is protruding with our cloth a lot more, so we made a mistake initially in our setup. If I look at the result of this negation here, so the negate p attribute VOP, let's go back to our first frame, 950. If I look at the result here from where we started with our convert, we can see that the mesh jumps a little bit when we do this negation. And this is because this extract centroid operation here is kind of giving us a point that's a little bit further, and this is because this is calculated at the center of mass. So this snap here, this slight snap between position, is kind of unavoidable. And this means that the initial position of our cloth is a little bit offset from where our mesh is originally. So if I preview the cloth and I also template this, we can see now that the character is protruding our cloth, whereas if I bypass this node, we have the correct result. So really, all we have to do to fix this is add this attribute VOP, so this negate p. Let's turn this back on. We can also duplicate this by holding Alt, and I will apply this operation to our cloth as well. Let's go ahead and get rid of this template display, and I'll just plug this directly here. So now when I preview the result, we can see that the cloth snaps a little bit forward as well, and now this will match perfectly with our character. The problem here where we apply the same operation, the same negate operation to our cloth, is that this is a moving point, right? So let's not forget that this moves in space. So when we preview the result of this negate, we will also apply this translation, and we only want to snap our cloth into place at the first frame, so our original 950. So we can just do a time shift for our extract p, and we can freeze this at frame 950. So now our point is frozen, so we only need this cloth essentially to work at the first frame. And now again, let's just template the mesh here, and we can see that this is working. And this means now that when we simulate on the first frame, we no longer have to worry about this intersection. So we can also see this right over here. If I bypass this negate that we apply to our cloth as well, that this is where the mesh protrudes our cloth, and this is what's going to make it like completely stick to this part. So with all cloth simulations, we have to make sure that the collision geometry is not intersecting the cloth that we are trying to simulate. So that's something I forgot to do in the first place, and we can go ahead now and let's resave this simulation. So let's check our new simulation and let's preview this with the static collision, and everything lines up perfectly now. So finally we can add back our position. So the translation, we'll just drag the attribute further down, and let's apply again. We are just applying the transform information from our extracted P, and let's preview this. Let's show all objects. So we have our mesh underneath, and finally everything's working. Now this isn't updating properly. We can move up to the top level. Let's preview this through our camera, and this is what we end up with. So we have no collisions, and we can see that the cloth is moving a lot more freely now that we don't have to worry about this forward translation that I keep bringing up. And we can see how much more fluid this cloth really is now. We can also preview this from the side, and we can see that there is this nice gap between the mesh, and this overall results in a lot more wrinkles. But like I said, this gives us the option to control the simulation and make it behave however we want. So this whole canceling of translation and adding this back in is something that comes up all the time in VFX. In fact, in one of my latest courses, Anime Run Effects, we used the same method here to simulate our cloth, and also we simulated some of these other effects, such as this dust kickback that we're having over here, and one of the particle layers as well we simulated on a static mesh that's animating at the origin, and then we reapplied that extracted transformation. So if you want to see how I build this entire shot, you can check out this course. It's called Anime Run Effects, and it's available on my website voxsite.com. And in fact, this transform canceling thing we are going to do for our shirt as well. So from here we can drop down a null, and we are pretty much finished with the cloth. So let's rename this to out cloth. Now, because we are going to bring this later in Solaris, it's worth getting rid of some of these attributes. We can see that by default, Vellum likes to add a lot of attributes here that we don't really need, and it's only going to make our life harder later down the road. So let's drop down an attribute delete, and let's select only the attributes that we want. We are going to want our velocity, our rest as well. So this is this attribute that we created here. This is used for shading, and for vertex attributes we probably don't need the UV because we are going to map different things on the rest, but let's keep the UVs as well. And for the primitive attributes, we don't really need any of this, so we can delete non-selected, and we are only going to keep these attributes. And we can also probably get rid of any groups as well. So let's drop down a groups delete, and we'll get rid of all of these groups. So now we have a clean mesh with only the attributes that we need. And one other thing that we will add here, we might as well add this now. Let's maybe hide other objects. We want to add some thickness to this, so let's do a Vellum post process. And I usually like to run this node after the simulation for most of the cloth simulations that I do. Let's also increase the spatial blur here, which will smooth out some of these nasty looking wrinkles. So I'll just increase this to maybe 0.4, and we want to, let's extrude by thickness, and I believe the default value of 1 and wire divisions 8 should work. So this is adding our thickness here. If you want a super smooth result, you can also turn on subdivisions here. You can set this to loop. We can see that this is taking a while, so this is making the mesh a lot heavier. If we can look at the wireframe, we can see now that we doubled the subdivisions. This smooths out everything, so it gives a nicer result. But in this case, I found that it wasn't really making too much of a difference from this camera at least, so I turned this off in my case. We might come back to this simulation later after we get our shirt going, but for now this is it for our cloth, and let's move forward with the shirt. So let's start working on the shirt now. So I'll go up and I'll create a new geo container and I'll rename this to fx underscore shirt. And we'll have to grab the shirt directly from our mesh. Let's grab our character from over here. Control C, and I will just do an object merge, bring this over in this shirt network, and we will have to unpack this as well because we still are working with the packed USDs. Let's go ahead and drop an unpack and a convert. So now if I press S, we can go ahead and select the shirt. Maybe let's press 4 and go into polygon selection because this makes a bit more sense. And I'll just press delete from over here and let's delete non-selected. So now we have our shirt. We will go to the first frame where our character is at rest. And we are going to do sort of a similar thing where we simulate at world origin and then we reapply the transforms of our character. But in this case, we are going to simulate a static mesh and we are going to point deform it with our moving character. So from over here where we select only our shirt, let's go ahead and do a time shift and I will freeze this at frame 950. So this is static now. And just to make things easier, I'm also going to do some transform operations here to bring this over to the center of our scene. So we can just use a match size node for this, which brings it in the center. And I will also turn on this option scale to fit so I can make this a little bit bigger just so we have further control over the simulation. So this is also something really common where you scale up your sources to match a given unit length size. So if I hold down spacebar and press 4 or 3 and go to one of these orthographic views, we can see here we have the 1 unit mark. So this currently has a height of around 1 meter. I can increase the target size here. Let's maybe make this bigger. So let's work with roughly 3 units. And we are going to use the ripple solver to generate these waves that move along the shirt. And if I were to use the ripple solver on the shirt as it is originally at around 1 unit height, the waves we generate would be sort of big and more rough. So like I said, we want further control. I'll just increase the size here because we are going to reapply this transformation, the reverse of this transformation later anyway, because we have moved it. So we might as well scale it and make our life easier. Let's go ahead and press spacebar 1 to go into perspective. And because, like I mentioned, we have to reverse this transform operation, we can stash the transform. So we'll just turn on this option and later down the road, we are going to create our simulation over here. And if I drop another match size from here, with this one, we can check this restore transform option and it will move it back where it was. So if I look at my convert, we can see that the shirt is exactly where we want. So in between, we can do here whatever we want and then we will reapply the original size and space it has relative to the world. So let's go ahead and check out the ripple solver. Let's drop this down. So ripple solver. We'll place our mesh as our first input. Let's go ahead and get rid of this mesh size connection for now. And this can also take in a displaced geometry. Now in this case, we don't really have it. So we'll just use the same input as our displaced geometry. So the normal static mesh. And finally, this will take a collide geometry as the third input. So for this, we are just going to generate some spheres on this side that will cause all of the ripples to happen. So let's go ahead and we can use a simple scatter for this, but I'll show you the problem here. Let's go ahead and drop a scatter. Let's drop the force total count maybe to 4, and I will turn off relax iterations. And for the global seed, I will just give this an expression, which is $F, and this will mean that we randomize the seed each frame. And now these are points, so we have to use actual geometry in order for this to work. So we'll just use a sphere. We'll drop down the sphere. Let's set this to polygon, and maybe we can increase the frequency. It doesn't really matter that much. And we'll use a copy to points and copy this onto our scatter points. So now we have geometry here. We can also template our shirt, and maybe we can reduce the size of this sphere. So I'll just drop down the sphere size from over here. Let's maybe use 0.2. And now essentially if I plug this directly as our third input here, we should already start to see our ripples happening. Let's leave all of the default settings for now and press play. Alright, so here we have it. Not that great of a result. And this is because, first of all, we need more resolution on our mesh, and the best way to do this to also maintain or rather preserve the UVs is to just simply subdivide the geometry. So from this mesh size, let's actually maybe drop a null here and rename this here to geo so we can plug more in between. I'll just drop down a subdivide here, and if I press spacebar 5, we can see that with the subdivisions we maintain our UVs, which is the important part here. Let's maybe just increase the depth here to a value of 2. And let's take a look at the ripple solver now. We should have a lot more details, and we can see that we do have more details here. Of course, it's worth appending a normal swap here and getting rid of some of these weird looking normals. And maybe we can go even a step further for our subdivisions, but I think for the most part, this should be fine. We can see that even with a lot more subdivisions, it's still a very fast simulation, so it might be worth having more subdivisions, but for the original example, I used a value of 2. We don't really want this ultra crisp wave detail action going. We can see that the more subdivisions we have, the finer the result is, so the finer wrinkles we will have essentially, but we don't really need this much. I think a value of 2 for the subdivide works slightly better here. This is the result that we are getting. Now we can see that this is maybe a little bit too chaotic. So we are spawning collision spheres each frame, and we want something a little bit more controlled. So what we can do, instead of spawning these many points each frame, we can use a pop simulation instead. And instead of this scatter here, we'll use our mesh to generate particles. So I'll drop down a pop network. Let's place this on our geo, and actually I'll get rid of the scatter. So inside this pop net, we can go to our source, scatter onto surfaces should be fine. And let's go to the birth tab and let's spawn a lot less particles. So let's maybe use a value of 4. And we also want to have a little bit of life to our particles. So, and let's actually go up and let's make sure the simulation starts at frame 950. Okay, and if I press play, this is what we get. So this is a little bit more controlled, as we can see. Maybe we can increase the birth rate here. Let's try a value of 10. And like I said, we'll decrease the life here. Let's maybe use 0.7, and also it's always worth introducing some variations, so let's use live variance 0.35. Let's turn off the guide because we don't need to see the geometry, and go up, and let's press play. Maybe this is a little bit too much, but let's check our result. So it's a lot more calm now, and we are starting to get the result that we are after. Now I want the ripples to only go from left to right to match our wind. So we will only need collision right on this part over here. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. We can either use a group and use a bounding box to select only parts here. But what I did in the original file is I just used a clip. So after our popnet, I drop down a clip and I press enter. And I just turn this around, hold control, turn this 90 degrees, and let's keep the points on this side. So I'll reverse the keep operation here, and maybe I'll also, if I preview the geo as well and go back to my clip, I can also maybe skew this more towards only on this side. So now if I look at the result, we can see that we are only spawning collisions on this side, and as a result we'll have waves that now go in the direction as our wind. So it kind of feels like there's this wind force that's actually pushing our shirt, but it's really just ripples. And we can see that this is a fast simulation and a pretty easy setup. So this is more on the side of a cheap effect. This isn't really necessarily physically accurate at all, but it's something that gives the illusion that wind is affecting the shirt as well. And we don't have to deal with any collisions and stuff like that. So in my hero power-up course, we did in fact simulate this shirt as well. Let's see if we can see this now. The shirt is slightly moving, so it's being affected by all of this energy. And the way that I simulated the shirt here and the pants as well is by using the Vellum solver, so more in the traditional way that you would simulate cloth. And we made sure to take care of collisions and intersections with the body and the accessories that are on top of the shirt and stuff like that. So it's a lot more setup and overall harder to do, but obviously this will give you the physically correct result by using the Vellum solver approach. So you can check out this course if you want to see how to properly simulate the cloth or rather the shirt in more of the traditional way. So now for our ripple solver settings, let's maybe first increase the size of our sphere. So the size of the geometry matters quite a bit here. We can go a step further. Let's use 0.25. So the bigger the collision geometry is, the stronger the waves will be. So if I press simulate now, we can see that maybe this is a little bit too strong. Let's keep this at 0.2 and let's take a look at some of the solver settings here. For the wave speed, I want this to move rather fast. So I set this to a value of 4 in the original example. So we can see now that this is a lot more chaotic. Of course, this is now crumpling everything up way too much. So this is where the rest spring option comes into place. So I set this to a value of 2. These kind of go hand in hand. And also the conservation value here, let's set this to a value of 0.4. And the conservation is basically the dampening of the ripples. The lower you set this value, the faster the ripples will sort of dissipate. So if I press play, this is the result. And I also increase the thickness here. We can give this a 2.5 value, which will make our waves a little bit stronger as well. It will treat this geometry as a thicker mesh. So these are the values I used, and for the simulation we can leave these steps as they are. So if I press play, this is the result. So we can see that after the first few frames, our waves start to accumulate and we kind of get this feeling that the wind is pushing the shirt. Also, I might want to adjust this clip, so we don't really want any particles spawning too much in the center here. So let's go to our clip here and let's drag this further away. And now maybe I can increase the scale of the sphere. So let's use 0.25 because I can see that the ripples are getting quite low in amplitude. So let's maybe check this. Alright, so this is what we're looking for. Maybe the speed is too high, but I will let you adjust the settings until you get the desired look. Maybe we can go even one step further for our size. Okay, maybe this is way too much. We can see something weird is happening here. So let's drop this back to 0.25 and I think this will be fine. So it takes some fine tuning and adjusting, but these are mainly the 3 settings that you have to play around with. And after you get the right values here, let's go ahead and we can just do a file cache on this. And I will rename this to shirt sim and save to disk, and this should be super fast. And this was done almost right away. And now what we have to do is let's move this back into place. So we will use this match size reverse thing here, so with the restore transform option, and this is now placed where the character is. And we will simply point deform it by using the original shirt. So let's grab our blast and our time shift. Let's maybe move things around. So this is the frozen shirt. Let's drop a point deform from our simulated shirt, and our frozen shirt should be our rest. So the second input in our point deform, and third input for our point deform is going to be our moving shirt. So this is before the time shift where our shirt has all the animations. So if I look at the point deform now, we should see our simulated cloth matching the movement of our regular shirt, and this is the result. So we can see that everything works. There are a few settings here on the point deform that we can take into account, but for the most part we can see that the default settings, the default values over here give us a pretty good result. So we can also overlay this with our cloth and our character. Let's go ahead and drop a null here, and I'll rename this to out shirt. Let's go up and let's preview everything together. And for our import character, let's go ahead and remove the shirt from here. So I'll press S, grab this shirt and press delete, just so we can preview this without the shirt because we are replacing this. And if I go up, we should only see the shirt with our wrinkles. And maybe to preview this faster, I will disable this Vellum post process just for now, so we have a little bit faster playback. Let's go in our camera and let's press play. So this is what we get. And we can see this very cool effect that matches the wind of our cloth. We also have this sort of wind affecting the shirt as well. So this is a really cheap effect, really fast setup, and we can see that it holds up. Of course, this works for this shot because it's pretty static. The movement of the character is not super fast and dynamic, so it probably doesn't hold up in some cases, but it can work in some of these slower moving cinematic shots. And it's just fun to do things a little bit differently. Now, we run into a small problem here where the shirt, because we don't have proper collisions, it's going to protrude a little bit with our mesh. And there's a very easy fix for this. We can go back inside our shirt container here. Let's show all objects. And from our point deform, what we're gonna do, and I do this all the time with cloth simulations to sort of force them into place without too much work, I can press S and go to my point selection with 2. Let's grab a point that's around the area that we are interested in, so maybe this one. I'll press T to drop down a transform node. Let's press M to switch the gizmo to world view, and I'll just drag this point out, and then I can use the scroll wheel. If I scroll up, I can turn on the soft selection radius here, and as I scroll up I increase the soft selection radius, and I'll just drag this out slightly until it no longer intersects. So what's cool about this and why this works with cloth simulations, and this probably doesn't work with any other type of simulation, is that the topology is consistent between frames. So because the topology doesn't change, this transformation here, this soft transformation, will be preserved for all of the frames. So if I preview this, let's go to our null, we can see that, let's maybe go up. We can see that, and let's turn off the cloth. We can see now that this transformation gets applied for all of the frames. Now we have a lot of stuff here that's not really working well with our mesh, but this is obscured by the cloth anyway. So I will be okay with that. So we can preview a few more frames, but I think everything holds up nicely for the most part. We can see here at this frame, for example, we also have this protrusion with our cloth. So what we can do is jump inside our cloth, and after our group delete here, let's show all objects. We can do the same thing for our cloth. I will go to the last node here, press S, grab one of these points up here at the top, press T, go into transform mode, move this around a little bit, and then increase with my scroll wheel the soft selection, and I'll just move things slightly till it no longer intersects. Alright, so as long as these soft transform operations are really subtle, just enough so that it doesn't further protrude with other geometries, these are completely fine, and it's something I do in production all of the time. We can see that the simulation movement is preserved throughout the whole duration anyway. So if I go to this frame and disable this, we can see this popping happening here. And we probably need to check all the frames and make sure that we don't have any other intersections and stuff like that. But this will be up to you because you will probably have different results anyway. And now we can move forward. And now finally we can take care of the smoke and dust. So we'll create a new geo container, and this will be our effects smoke and dust. Let's disable maybe all of this. We only really need to preview our geometry, and I'll preview the out character without this blast thing here. Let's step inside. Let's show all objects. We'll need to reference our character here so we know where the bounds of our simulation should be. And we can start by creating the source. So let's just simply drop a box from here. I'll press enter so we have the gizmo controls, and I'll just scale this up and try to match roughly the walking distance that the guy travels here. So maybe something like this will be fine. We also want to have some room here in the back as well. And of course we need to raise this up a bit. Now the thickness of this box matters quite a bit because we are going to create volumes based on this. So the thicker we have this box, the more smoke we are going to generate, and we only really want to generate a bit, so I'll just keep this. I'm just eyeballing this value, and I know this from previous experiments that this is roughly what I want. Just have a little bit of thickness so it's not really thin like a sheet of paper. So we can settle for something like this and come back later and adjust, maybe raise this up slightly. And we actually need this to be on the ground. We can link up these two values here, so I'll right click, copy parameter, paste relative references below, and I'll divide this value by 2. So now this will be always on the ground. And let's also look through the camera and make sure that our box isn't showing here. So with this camera viewport selected, I can hold down Control and press 2. And in this viewport, in the side view here, I can press spacebar F. And we can maybe bring this a little bit closer. We just have to avoid the box showing in this camera view here. So we can actually bring this way closer. We want to have some space here just so we have realistic results, and something like this should be fine. Like I mentioned, we can come back and adjust this. Maybe this box is even a little bit too big, so I'll scale this down on all sides here, and this should be fine. Maybe make this thinner. Let's go back to a single view, and let's turn this into a volume. So we'll do VDB from polygons, we'll turn on fog VDB, disable distance VDB, and let's reduce the voxel size. The final resolution that I used was 0.02. Let's set this to 0.05 for now, and we want to introduce some noise to this fog. So this will be our density source, and with any pyro simulation we want to have a lot of variation in the density source. So let's do a volume noise fog from here. We'll set the operation to multiply, and we also want to enable remap values here. Let's expand this and let's set this to B-spline, and I'll add another point here and just drag this down so we have this exponential ramp thing going, and I'll even squeeze these values a little bit. We just want to generate small patches of smoke which will be pushed around by the wind. And because we are going to animate this value, so let's also go here and turn on animation. Let's check our pulse duration, and I think maybe the default values will be fine. So we can see that because we animated this density here, we'll generate some smoke coming from over here, and then it's gonna go from over here, and over time with enough pre-roll it's going to very easily fill up this entire space that we need. We will maybe come back to this later. Let's go ahead and set up our Pyro solver setting. So I'll go to the first frame, 950. Let's drop down this Pyro solver, and let's set the voxel size here to 0.05. And in fact, we can link this up. So I will copy parameter and let's paste relative references for our VDB from polygons. And let's take a look at the settings here. So right away, because we want this to be a very chaotic moving smoke and have that feeling of energy and fast movement, I straight up increased the time scale here, and I used a value of 1.7. And because this is now increased, we are probably going to need more substeps, so I will just increase the max substeps here to a value of 2. Let's go further to our bounds, and we can give this a container where our simulation can live. So if we can turn on limit maximum size, and I'll press enter, and let's make sure that this encapsulates our box. So I will hold down shift and template my box as well, and use my box as a reference here. So this is where our smoke is allowed to be, and we can squeeze this, and also here at the ground, and up here at the top we don't really care that much, but something like this will be fine. Let's also go to collision, and we want to collide with our floor, so we will go to ground planes, and we will set this Y ground plane. Let's close below, and the value of 0 will be fine, which is where our ground is. Let's go to sourcing, and here we can disable, or we can get rid of all of our sources. We only really need the density here. For our fields, we can turn off dissipation, because when our smoke reaches the bounds of this container, it will no longer simulate. So we don't really need to worry about dissipation. Let's also turn off the flame field here, and in the shape tab, let's for now turn on our wind. And we don't really need this buoyancy option here, but because we are not using temperature fields. For the wind speed, I used a value of 2.2, so I want this to be moving quite fast for the wind as well. And the wind direction, the value of 1 on the X will give us the direction that we need, but I decided to push the smoke downwards a little bit as well, so I set this second value here, which is the Y value, to a negative 0.2. So let's see what these settings will give us for now, and we are not going to use the built-in Pyro solver microsolvers at the sub level over here. We're going to dive inside and use our own gas microsolvers, but let's see how this looks for now. Okay, so we are off to a good start, and this is roughly the speed that I'm going for. We can see that very quickly we can fill up this entire region, which is great. We might want a little bit more smoke in the back, so I can increase or maybe reposition this box a little bit so it covers more on the back side of the character. And now we have to readjust our container as well. So let's make sure that we are not cutting off the smoke that we want. Okay, let's go back. So this will be fine for now. This preview is not entirely accurate because we can change the shading later in rendering. So we can drop down a Pyro Bake volume and just increase the density. And also let's tint this smoke a little bit so it's better representing of the colors that we are going to end up with. Okay, so we have something like this, and we can look through our camera, sort of get a feel where we're at. Okay, let's now work on our gas microsolvers so we can really get the look that we are after. And we'll double click the Pyro solver to jump inside, and we're going to plug everything inside this advection output. Let's start with a gas turbulence, and right away, if we look at the default settings, we actually have to preview this. I'll pin this at the sub level here so we can actually see what we're doing. Right away, we have a little bit of turbulence, so this is already looking a lot better. And depending on the kind of result that you're going for and how chaotic you want the simulation to be, these settings will matter a lot. But generally what I like to do, especially with these type of simulations, is use a noise for larger movement changes. So I will increase the scale here quite a bit, and also the swirl size by a lot. And let's preview this now. So this will create the general motion of our smoke, and we can see now that we really start to have a lot of features in our smoke and a lot of breakup and really just a lot of chaos. So now it's starting to actually feel like a sandstorm. And on top of this, I like to layer a smaller version of this noise, so we can actually rename this to turbulence big, and we can duplicate this, and this will be, let's go with turbulence small, and we'll just simply merge these together. And this one will be designated for smaller features, so smaller breakups and stuff like that. And let's reduce the scale here quite a bit because we also will reduce the swirl size. So if we compare these two, we can see the difference. And again, this is just for smaller breakups, and this isn't going to be necessarily super noticeable if I play this. It's not entirely accurate what we're previewing here because we don't have enough voxel resolution. So when we increase the voxel size, or rather decrease it to increase the overall resolution for the smoke, this second gas turbulence will be a lot more noticeable. All right, and as the final thing, we can also introduce some gas disturbance. So let's drop down a gas disturb, and this will sort of be even smaller breakup of our noise. Plug this here, and the default strength of 25 was fine. I just changed the mode here to block based, which gives the best results. And also I will turn on this rotational force option here, which will mean essentially that the gas disturb will affect the parts of the smoke that are moving faster. It will affect those parts more and leave the calmer parts undisturbed, and this is what's going to create the nice variation in the features. Otherwise, if we don't turn this on and we keep the same gas disturb intensity throughout the whole simulation, it's really going to break up the smoke too much, and it will sort of diffuse everything. So that's definitely a look that you can go for, and it's possible that you may actually need this in certain types of simulations, but in this case we don't want that, so we will turn on this option. And let's go up to our pyrosolver settings, and let's just increase the voxel size. For the original simulation that I did, I used a voxel size of 0.02, so let's set this up here and let's play the simulation for a bit. And also let's go back to our pyrosolver and not forget to turn on some settings. In the output tab here, let's only export our density, and we'll also need our velocity, so we don't really need any of these other fields. Let's also convert this to VDB just because it's lighter and it's always worth doing. And we have this option here, add wind to velocity field. So let's turn this on because in the fields tab, or rather the shape tab, we are using this field option here. We want to add this to our simulation. I don't really know why this option isn't turned on by default, or why this is even an option, because we always want to have the correct velocity being exported by the noise. But whatever, just turn this on. And again, this is to export the correct velocity. So we can run this now for a few frames. We can see now that this is running a lot slower, and this is of course a normal thing with all kinds of simulations. I'll just let this run for a few frames. So we can already see a lot of cool features starting to form here, and it looks a lot more like an actual sandstorm. Let's maybe increase the density even more just to see these features better, and let's maybe go up, and I have a distant light here, and we can turn on the normal lighting option here, and maybe I can increase the intensity. Let's increase this and the shadows. Okay, so we end up with something like this, and let's look through our camera. So this is pretty good already. Now if I check my grid here, if I go to the information, this is the grid that we are dealing with now, which is roughly 450 on the widest dimension here, so the Z, which is still pretty low. We are only running 10 million voxels. It's honestly kind of low. We can probably go even further. We can probably set the voxel size here to 0.015 for production. I might use 0.001. And this will of course give you a better result overall. For this tutorial, I'll keep the size as it is, and I'll leave it up to you to simulate at a higher resolution if you want to. So from here, I can just do a file cache, and I'll just save this as, let's use smoke, and I will save to disk, and this will be our smoke simulation. And now that we have the smoke, we can start working on the dust. Let's check maybe some few frames here. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this. Some of the main settings to take into account is, of course, all of the gas microsolver settings here. So our noise settings and the disturb one. And also the volume noise fog options here. give a different result. So for example, if I wanted more smoke, I can simply drag over this point here and allow less noise to really eat away our density source. So let's maybe bring this down back, and this is completely up to you depending on what kind of look you're going for. And let's maybe preview through our camera as well, and we have a lot of details here and variation, so this will be fine. Let's go ahead and drop a null from here, and let's rename this to, let's go without SMK for smoke, and now we can use the velocity field here to affect our particles. Let's start from roughly the same source. So we want to have a source for the particles that's sort of the same as our initial box for the smoke. So from our box here, I can press S and press 4 and just select this polygon over here because we only really need a thin surface. So I'll press delete, and let's go ahead and disconnect this blast node and start a separate chain over here to the left. And for this blast, let's delete unselected, so we only have this plane here. Now let's create our source. So we want to scatter some points and we want to randomize these points per frame. We will go to our global seed here and let's use the $FF expression. Let's disable iteration, relax iterations here, and we'll have to readjust this force total count. Let's just spawn a few points for now. Maybe let's also press D and go to the geometry here and reduce the point size back to a value of 3. So this is the source that we have right now. Now we can use this source as it is directly inside a pop network, and we would get a pretty good result. But usually what I like to do is introduce some noise into this as well. So following the same principles that we did for our density here, where we added the noise, let's create a noise attribute. So let's drop down an attribute adjust float. Let's rename this to noise, and we will set the operation. Let's set always pattern type. Let's use noise, and we can preview this. If I click on this icon over here, we can see our noise pattern, and we also want to animate this. So let's turn on animate noise, and probably the pulse duration of 1 should be fine. And what we can do from here, let's turn off our visualizer. Let's use a blast node and let's get rid of any points that are above a certain value of this noise attribute that we created. So over here we can run this over points, and here we'll say that we'll add an expression and say that if this noise value is bigger than 0.5, we'll get rid of those points. So it will create these patches of points, and as a result the simulation will have a sort of clustering nature to it, which overall gives a little bit better result. Let's maybe adjust our noise now, and we can play around with the remap ranges here. We can maybe get rid of more points. We can also increase or decrease the element size. Maybe we can decrease this slightly. We can also go to our fractal settings, and if I increase this roughness value, we can start to introduce more stray points. So we can also have just slightly more variation, and if I increase the force total count, we can see the pattern that we have here. We don't really need as many points. Obviously we can go back to this value and bring in more particles if we want, but this will be a good source to start with. So from here we will do a pop network. Let's run this from frame 950 and go back. Let's step inside, and for our pop sources, because we don't have any surfaces, we'll set this to all points, and let's disable the guide. Let's go to our birth tab, and let's maybe make these last 1 second for now. We'll come back and readjust this, but first we want to advect them with our velocity field. So let's do a pop advect by volumes. Let's go up and let's grab our smoke and let's paste this over here in our SOP. Let's the field name will look for velocity, which is what we want. Advection type, let's use update position, and let's use velocity update. Let's do final velocity. So with these options we will have the most accurate advection. So it will move 1-to-1 with our velocity field. So if I press play now, we can see that this is what we have. And for the most part, we are getting what we want. Let's maybe turn the display here. Let's maybe use pixels instead. We can also preview this through our camera. We can see that we have this kind of obvious pattern to our particles here. and they have this gapping step between them, and this is because the velocity is roughly moving at the same speed. We can alter this a little bit if we turn on this use expression. We can modify this velocity scale per point. So this parameter is called vel scale. So let's go ahead and type here vel scale, and we will do a multiply equals, and we'll multiply this with a random value for each particle that goes maybe from 0.5 to 1.5. So this will give us enough difference between each point to break up this sort of stepping uniform result that we get here. So let's generate a random value based on our seed, and then we can do a fit 0, 1 expression, and we want to map the 0 to 1 ranges that the random generates to a value of 0.5, like I said, and let's do 1.5 for our higher end. And now if I replay the simulation, we have a lot more variation, and we successfully broke up that weird looking stepping shape. So press play, and now we can also probably tell that a life expectancy of 1 should be fine. In this case, I think we might want to spawn more or less particles. I think we maybe want less particles, so let's go to our scatter here and just reduce this maybe to a maybe to 1500 instead of 3000. So we end up with something like this, which is closer to what I originally had, I think. And we can see that a lot of these particles that are being pushed out of the area where our velocity field is, when they no longer find any velocities to be advected by, we can see that they start to freeze, and we can just go ahead and delete these. Let's use a geometry VOP here. We will need to grab the speed of the particles. So from the velocity, we will compute the magnitude. So let's use a length node, and this will give us the speed, and we can compare this. Let's drop down a compare, and we'll say that if this is less than or equal to 0, we are going to go ahead and remove those points. So we will do an if block over here, and this will be our condition, the bool result of our compare, and over here we will do a remove point, and we will run this over all of our points. So we will just grab the ptnum value here and point it to our ptnum, and we can see now that this removes all of those particles that are stuck. So when a particle no longer has any velocity to it, we will just remove it because we don't really care about it. It probably doesn't make a lot of difference in this case. I think you can simply skip this operation, honestly, if you want, but it's still something worth knowing how to do, because you might apply this at other simulations. So this is it for our particles, and we can also overlay this with our smoke and see how these line up. Let's maybe use the second preview here, and this is what we end up with. Maybe the particles are moving a little bit too fast. So what we can do is go back inside here, and for our random destination values here, we can go from 0.3. Let's use a maximum value of 1. So this will mean that at most they will receive the full force of our velocity and not go above that. So this should prevent our particles to really going way too further out of our velocity. So I think maybe this is matching the smoke a little bit better for the most part. Okay, so this will be fine. Let's go ahead, and we mentioned in the beginning of the course that we are going to render these as geometry. So we are going to create a simple sphere, and let's set this to polygon and just increase the frequency here a bit, and we will noise this up with a mountain sop. All right, let's disable noise along vector, and I want to use a whirly cellular noise to start with. Let's increase the element size and decrease the amplitude, so we can see that this whirly noise gives us this kind of rocky shape by default, which is really great for this kind of operation. Maybe we can also play around with the offset until we get something that looks a little bit cooler. So maybe something like this. I might increase the amplitude even more. Let's decrease the, maybe we'll keep the element size as it is, and we'll use a second noise on top of this just to add even more details, so a smaller frequency, or rather higher frequency details for this operation. And we can do something like this. Now, because we are going to use motion blur on this, doesn't really matter that much the shape that we end up with. We just want to make sure that it's a little bit irregular, so we're not dealing with just a simple sphere. We also want this to be right at the origin in order for the copy to points to work properly. So let's also do a match size, which brings it right here where we want it. And now we can grab our particles. Let's do a copy to points from our sphere and plug our particles as the template points. And let's see what we end up with. Let's also pack an instance, our geometry, so we don't waste any memory trying to replicate the actual geometry on all of the points. And we can see that this is now a very fast operation. Of course, we'll have to modify some attributes on our particles. Let's start by doing an attribute randomize, and let's take a look at our p-scale. So we'll set the attribute name here, p-scale. Let's use distribution. We'll use one of these other ones. Let's try custom ramp, and let's say that we want to fit the lowest and maximum values. We'll go from 0.2 to maybe 0.6, which should give us enough variation between the size. Let's also turn this into a B-spline ramp, and we will do another exponential ramp over here, which really is the best for this kind of distribution for the points. And we will need to decrease the global scale overall until we match the size that we need. So let's maybe start with a value of 0.01 and also turn on show all objects and look at our character as well. Okay, and we can maybe look through our camera, and this is what we have. We might want to increase this global scale. Let's maybe try 0.02. We shouldn't really go too high above. We will need to come back to this value after we do some test renders and check out the motion blur, because this scale will really affect the final output that we have. So it's not really worth spending a lot of time at this point adjusting the scale. But we are roughly in the ballpark of what we need. Now, whenever we are working with particles, we have to go to the option here, and let's turn on to use the seed attribute ID. Otherwise, the p-scale will change for each particle, each frame, and this is not what we want. One other thing that we can randomize also is going to be the orientation. So let's also do another attribute randomize. Let's randomize our N attribute, and for this we'll use inside sphere, which will just give all of our particles a random orientation. So we can maybe zoom in on some of these, and we can see as I turn this on and off, they're all facing the same direction now, and with this they're all facing a random direction. Also for this we want to turn on the seed attribute option here. And for the most part this is all we have to do for our dust layer, and the only thing left to do here is maybe clean up all the attributes to prepare this for bringing it into Solaris. So let's get rid of any attributes that we don't need. We'll drop an attribute delete. We will want to keep our N and P scale, which is the attributes that we adjusted here, so we will obviously want to keep those. Let's delete non-selected, and we also want to keep our velocity, and this will be necessary for motion blur. And these are pretty much all the attributes that we need. We might want to increase their life a little bit longer. Some of these particles that have a lower advection scale might die off a little bit too soon, so we can go inside the popnet and we can increase the life expectancy. Let's maybe just double this, and I can reset the simulation. All right, so we can go in our camera and we can preview this, and I can pretty much say that we are off on the right track. Like I mentioned earlier, we will probably need to come back and adjust the p-scale here. But we can save out this simulation, and because we want to adjust the p-scale later, let's go ahead and do a file cache before our attribute randomized nodes. We'll drop a file cache here, and this will be our dust PRT, and we are going to save this to disk. And from here we can do another null here. We can do another null, and I'll rename this to out dust PRT. And with this, we have everything we need. We can now import all of these layers in Solaris and set things up and start working on our render layers. Now we can bring all of our elements into Solaris, and let's start by bringing in the character related items, which is the shirt and the cloth. And let's start actually with the shirt, which is the easiest one. Let's go ahead and step inside here. I will grab this null here, out shirt, and I will Control C, and let's go ahead and press N and jump over to the loft stage. And over here where we have our character, let's do a SOP import first of all to bring in our shirt, and we want to sublayer this over our existing shirt that we have, and this means that we are going to retain this material assignment so we don't have to reparent everything. This will essentially just overlay the mesh of this shirt. Let's jump into the Solaris desktop here that I have, and for this layering to work, we need to have the same path that we have for our shirt. We need to have the same path over here. So if I look at this sublayer here, which is going to be our character, we have this character group, so this CHR group, and inside this we will find our body group, which is another group, and then finally here we should have our shirt mesh, which is this shirt 001. So we have to match this path that we have. So in our SOP import, let's go ahead and try to match this. For the import path prefix, let's place this inside the care group and then inside the body. So now we roughly have the same thing. The mesh name has to be the same as it is also. So if we look at this again, this mesh name will be shirt 001, and this is mesh 0, which is the default that Houdini gives us. Let's jump back to the object context here, and let's jump back in our effects shirt container, and over here where we have our last node, the edit one, we can just simply append a name SOP, and this will override the name that we have. And for this we want to give this name here. Let's set this to shirt underscore 001. So you can use whatever name you want here. It just has to match the naming convention that we decided for our character. And we can see this in our scene graph here, the mesh name updated to this shirt 001. So now let's jump back to LOPS. If we do a sub layer from our anim node, we can simply point our SOP import. Let's plug this as our second input here, and when we do this, we can see that the shirt updated. And even though we don't have the same topology, so if we move over here and I press Shift W to preview the wireframe, we can see that because we added the subdivisions, we don't have the same topology, but because we are using the same name and path, this will replace our original mesh entirely, and we still have the material assignment. So if I press Shift R, we don't have any light here. Let's maybe go to our last node here where we also have the physical sky. So I'll just do a quick preview. Let's maybe increase the light intensity or maybe increase the exposure. We can see that this works now. So our material assignment was preserved, and this is the simulated shirt which has all of the wrinkles from the ripple deformer. So it's a pretty cool way to work this way in Solaris. I think it's just a matter of getting used to work in this way, but once you do, you can really start to take advantage of all of the benefits that the USD pipeline provides. So this will be our shirt, and we can go ahead now and let's bring in our cloth. So let's step inside here, and for this, let's grab this, Control C, bring this over to LOPS and do another SOP import. Because we don't have any pre-existing material for this, so I'm just going to paste the SOP F here, and we will simply do a merge and just merge this in our chain, and we can check some frames here and see that this is working. Let's maybe go back here and not forget to turn on our Vellum post process back, so we get our thickness as well. Now we don't have to worry about any sublayering here because we don't have an existing material for our cloth. We are going to create this ourselves. Let's maybe still place this inside the character folder at least. So in our SOP import here, we can set this in the car directory. And let's maybe also make a new directory. Let's place this in car/cloth. All right, so we can see this hierarchy here. And when we go to our merge, we are going to have everything nicely organized. Let's go ahead and create this material. So after our SOP import, let's do a material library, and let's step inside. We will do a Karma material builder. We can rename this to cloth, and let's step inside here and get rid of these because we won't need only the standard surface. Let's just start with some basic values here. I'll just drop down the base a bit to check that this is working, and for the specular I'll just increase the roughness. Let's go up one more level, and let's autofill materials, which will bring the materials in this material library, and also use this to assign it to the geometry, and we can drag our cloth path right over here inside the geometry path. And now if I do a test render, let's maybe set this to, okay, this is set to Karma XPO, so this is fine. Now if I go back inside our cloth, we should see our material updating, so we can see that this works, and we can start building the material. Let's set the base back to a value of 1, and I just want to map a few noises on this texture that sort of will be this dirt layer. So we're going to keep this fairly simple, although you can build quite complex shaders with Material X. So let's just go ahead and drop down a MTLX Fractal 3D, and if we plug this directly inside the base color, we should already start to see something, and we do. So here we have it. We will need to adjust some settings here, but first we will need to make this pattern a little bit smaller. So we can map this to the position, so we can drop an MTLX position node, which essentially just brings our wall position, but this will make it so that the noise doesn't stick to our cloth. And this is why we created that rest attribute on the geometry. So the way we import attributes is by using a prim var reader. And in here, we just have to specify what attribute we want. Var name will be rest, and the signature is going to be float3. So if I plug this now in our position, so this works exactly how it would in VOPs. As far as the noise being generated on the position, we just have a few different settings here. So let's press Shift R, and if I preview some more frames, we can kind of see that the noise is sticking to the surface of the cloth, and it's moving alongside with it. So this is what we want. And in between here, if I multiply the value of this position, we can decrease the scale of the noise. So we can do a multiply here, and let's set the signature to vector3 FA. And if I increase this, now we can see we modify the scale of the noise. Let's do something like this and go inside our fractal node, and I will increase the linearity to start, and maybe also let's leave the amplitude as 1, and this diminished value can also have a big impact on how our noise looks. Let's maybe do something like this. I can maybe decrease the linearity and increase the octaves levels instead. So I think this is starting to look kind of like dust. Of course, this is way too wide, so we can drop a ramp in between, and this will be the Karma ramp constant, not the regular ramp parameter. Let's use this one instead. And the signature here, let's keep this as vector, and for the colors we want to use, instead of white, let's use something like a sand color. So I'll go towards this orangey color, and let's desaturate this a bit and drop down the intensity. So let's do something like this. I'm not gonna spend too much time adjusting all of these settings because I will let you do this, just so I'm not wasting too much time. And for the most part, this is already starting to look kind of the way I want. I might also want to introduce a little bit of brightness or value in this other color here, which is our blacks. Let's leave this like so, and maybe I can play around with the scale of this. So I think this is starting to look pretty decent. This obviously needs a lot more fine-tuning than this. Let's maybe for now just decrease the overall value and saturation, and we can settle for something like this. Maybe finally let's decrease the diminished value here a little bit as well. All right, and we can do the same thing to layer an additional noise on top of this. So we can just go ahead and grab all of these layers. Let's grab these three ones and hold down Alt to duplicate. Let's plug this to preview just this new layer, and we want to offset this value a little bit, so we can just do an add here and offset this value like so. All right, just so it's a different pattern, and we might want to, let's increase this and let's make this a little bit more white. All right, let's do something like this. Diminish this even more, or rather decrease the diminish value here. Okay, and we'll just simply add these layers together. So we'll do an add here, and now we have just 2 layers of noise, again to just have a little bit more variation. Now this doesn't look all that great because we really need to spend a little bit more time adjusting the values here. I might also want to use a B-spline value here, and I can squeeze this white noise a little bit more to something like this. Okay, but hopefully this gives you an idea on how easy it is to create some interesting materials directly inside of Karma. We also see a little bit of protrusions over here with our shirt, and again all we have to do is simply go inside, grab the mesh with an edit node, and use a soft transform to bring this further out so that it doesn't intersect, or we can grab the shirt that's underneath and push this down in the opposite direction. Now in my original renders I also used some fabric textures from Megascans. So I downloaded this fabric cloth cotton material here, and I used only the roughness and the normal textures from this. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this in the Material X editor. So we can do an MTLX image node, and let's go ahead and grab the normal here, and this signature should be a vector 3. And let's also grab the roughness. Let's go ahead and look for our roughness. Let's take care of the normal first. So this has to be plugged first inside a normal map node, and then this is going to be plugged inside the geometry, inside the normal. And we can see this pattern now here. We also see that this is a little bit too big for our shirt, or rather our cloth, so we can change this if we bring out our texture coordinates, plug this as our text coordinates, which is the default by default. But now since we have this, we can use a multiply in between, and we can set this to a vector 2 FA. And if I increase the scale here, we will pretty much increase the tiling. So now this will tile a little bit more, and the pattern will be smaller. And we'll do the same thing. Let's also plug our roughness. So this will be the normal, and we want to use the same texture coordinates for our roughness. So again, this will be our roughness, and the signature should be float here. Plug this in our specular and inside the specular roughness. So we end up with this. Pretty basic, I would say, but this is, again, just to give you an idea on some of the things that are possible here. We can get pretty advanced with shaders, so there's definitely a lot of options that you have. And this will be fine for our cloth, so we can go back up, and this will be everything we need for our character. In fact, we can probably look at this through our camera, and this is the result. Let's maybe go ahead and change our sky slightly. Let's lower this a little bit. And in the original example, I think I used a lower altitude here, so it's something like a sunset sun. We can also maybe preview the sky for now. So I did something like this, and I think I used a light that comes over from this side. So let's increase the solar azimuth, which is basically the rotation of the sun around the orbit. So I think I did something like this in the original renders. We can see that we have a very sharp shadow here, so we can soften this by increasing the angular size. So if I set this to 10, we have smoother shadows, which I'm not sure how physically accurate it is or not, but in my case, I like having softer shadows in general with all of the renders. Maybe we can increase this even further to a value of 20. And to have more information, I also used a directional light as well, or rather a distant light. Let's drop this here, and we will merge this in our lights part over here. Let's bring this up, and for our distant light, we can turn on the visibility of our lights, and I just want a light that points directly straight down, so that's coming from above. I'll hold down Control and rotate this 90 degrees. Let's maybe turn off the physical sky for now so we can focus on our distant light, and maybe I'll just turn this slightly over our character. So this is the direction that I ended up with. This is mainly to get a little bit more highlights in our smoke, but also our character. And overall, it's just nicer to have additional light information than not having it at all. And later we will export passes for all lights individually. So let's turn back our physical sky. And in order to split up the AOVs per light, we will have to turn on some options here. We will go in the Sun tab for our sky. And inside the light, we have to set some LPE tags for each light. So let's set or create. This will be our sun. Go over to the sky, and this will be our sky. And then our distant light. Let's go over to Karma tab, and we have this LPE tag here, set or create, and this will be distant. All right, and we'll set up all of the AOVs a little bit later. We still have to bring in our effects layers first. Let's go back to our object viewport, and let's step inside our smoke, and we'll start with our volume. So I will grab this out SMK. Let's go back to LOPS, and we'll do a SOP import. Let's bring this in here, and from here what we can do, let's give this a path. So let's place this inside an effects folder or container, and let's place this under smoke. And here we have our hierarchy. We can also see that we are bringing in both the density and the velocity field. Now we don't really need the velocity field, so we can get rid of this. Let's do a stage manager from our SOP import, and we'll scroll, or rather use the drop down here to go to our velocity, and I'll just select this and press delete. So now we only have our density, and we can merge this in. Let's do a material library from here, and let's create a pyro material. We'll step inside, we'll do a karma pyro material, and we can get rid of these AOVs. Let's go ahead and remove this, and we can also get rid of the material properties and the inputs, so we only want this pyro shader. Usually I like to link the density scale and the shadow density, so I will right click, copy parameter, and paste relative references, and I'll just start with a value of 5, and we'll work from here depending on how this looks in the render. So let's go up. I'll rename this to, let's do FG smoke. So this will be our foreground smoke, and we'll use the same smoke for our background. We'll just push it further back and scale it up a little bit. But anyway, from here, let's go ahead and autofill materials and assign this to the geometry. Let's drag our smoke layer over here, and we can do a merge, and let's bring this in our chain, and we can go to the karma render settings here, and let's preview this from our camera. Press Shift R, and let's also make sure that this is running on the XPU, and we'll give this a second. So this is the result, and now that I'm seeing this, we can adjust the lights further. Let's maybe disable the distant light for now, and we might want to go to our sun settings here. Let's maybe decrease the solar altitude even more, and we can play around with the azimuth. Maybe I also want to make this slightly thicker, so I'll go to the material and I will increase the density scale. Let's try maybe 7. We can further control the density in comp later. Don't have to worry too much about this now, but it's still going to be helpful to get us as close as possible to the result that we want. Maybe this is too strong. I might want to preview some other frames as well. All right, actually I think this is looking fine. Obviously you are free to experiment and use whatever values you see fit. Let's go ahead and press Shift R, and let's go up. So this will be our foreground smoke, and we'll do the same setup really for our background smoke. Let's go ahead and we'll make some room here, and I'll actually just duplicate all of these nodes, so the stage manager and the material library. And for the stage manager, we want to change the name here. So this original one that we did is using this path here, we can update the path. Let's try, instead of smoke, let's set this to BFG smoke. Let's use underscore. And for our second one, this one, let's rename this to BG smoke. And we will also need to update our material library here. So let's drag our FG smoke again over here, and for our second one we'll drag the BG smoke. The reason that we have to modify the path is that if we have the same path for both objects, Solaris will simply overlay them instead of combining them. So when we set up a different path, even though they're the same simulation and the same object, as long as they have a different path, they will be treated as different objects. So with this stage manager, I can grab this handle here for the BG smoke, and I can drag this further back maybe, and let's also scale this up a little bit and drag this even more. Let's maybe see how this will look in our main chain. So I'll just simply merge this here as well, and we can see that when we merge everything, now we have both objects showing. And grab our handle back, our gizmo, and maybe I have to push this further back to something like this, and we'll do, I think this looks all right. Maybe we need this even bigger. We just want to make sure that we don't have a completely dark background. And for this background layer, we want to increase the thickness even more. So I will disable the merge with our foreground so we can only focus on this background smoke. Let's go to our camera and press Shift R. And like I said, for this, let's go back in our foreground smoke. Now I should rename this probably to BG smoke, and we will have to update our material library as well. So let's use BG smoke. Okay. And let's step inside, and I'll just increase the density here. Let's maybe try double, so 15. Okay, so we end up with something like this. And again, this is simply just to avoid having a completely dark background. We can preview some other frames as well. And in my case, I think this will be just fine. So let's go up, and this will be our smoke. Let's press Shift R, and I'll actually disable both of these merges for now. Let's make some room, and let's work on our dust. So I will go to the object again, and let's grab our dust layer from over here. So we'll grab this dust PRT, and we will paste this inside a new SOP import, SOP path over here, and we'll place this again in the effects layer, and this will be under a dust group. Let's use a merge, and let's just simply merge this directly in our comp and see what we get. Now, by default, this SOP import isn't recognizing our packed primitives. So if I drop down this dust layer here, we can see we have access to all of the thousands of points here, and this is not really what we want. We want to treat this as a point instancer, which will be a lot faster. So let's go to primitive definition here, and let's check this packed primitives, and we want to set this to create point instancer. So now we can see we no longer have a layer for each one of the points. We only have this instances object, and as a result we should be able to, I mean, it still needs a second to update everything, but this is a lot faster and more efficient. And it makes sense that we want to work with packed primitives since they are packed primitives at the SOP level. Now for this layer, like I mentioned when we created it, we are concerned a lot with the motion blur here. So let's go to our Karma render settings, and in the camera effects we have motion blur turned on by default, but we want to turn on this instance velocity blur. So these are all instances and they have the velocity attribute. So let's turn on velocity blur and see what we get. So let's press Shift R. So we can see that the velocity blur is working, and we also have the depth of field affecting these. And this is pretty much all we need for this layer. I can check a few more frames, and I think I'm pretty happy with this result, to be honest. And it's very close to what I rendered originally. Now you can also assign a material for this because we haven't over here. We see that these are a little bit brownish by default, and this is because we are absorbing the color of the sun and the sky. And I think honestly this will work just fine because we can do a lot of further grading and adjusting later in comp. So you can assign a material to this if you want to, but I will just leave this as it is, and we can move forward and set up all of the render layers. And for our render layers, let's go ahead and start with the simplest one, which is going to be this smoke here in the back. So this is without any of the other layers. Let's go in Solaris and we'll create separate chains for all of our layers. I'll go ahead and press Shift R to get out of render view. And let's go ahead and just enable all of our other layers as well. So the smoke and also this distant light. Now, we want to get rid of all the objects except this background smoke. So let's do a prune here, which is essentially like a blast, and we'll select our background smoke and we are going to prune unselected. And we have an error happening over here. We are not seeing our background smoke and we can see that this is red, which probably means something went wrong. And I think this is because I have an existing chain that already uses the same naming convention here. So I think that we can see that as I turn this node on and off, we get it back. So let's go back to our prune over here and into our karma render settings. Let's go inside the cam. And if we do a test render, we can see that we no longer have our lights, and this is because we got rid of our lights as well. So let's also bring our lights here. I'll do slash lights, which is where all of our lights are placed by default. And now we should also have the sky and the sunlight. So let's set up the AOVs for this. We're gonna go ahead and for the karma render settings, let's go to image output, and we don't really need the beauty for this because we are going to recreate this. We'll go to the volume and we'll want to have the direct volume and indirect volume as well. And for the direct volume, we want to split this per lights. Let's also go to our filters and we are going to use the optics, NVIDIA optics denoiser on all of these AOV. So let's select our direct volume distance. We don't need the C AOV, which is the beauty pass. So we have our direct volume distance, our sky and sun, and we also want this indirect volume. The indirect volume is basically the bounces. And speaking of which, let's go to limits here and we'll disable the reflection diffuse limits. We only want to increase this volume limit. Let's use a value of 1, maybe actually set this to a value of 2. So let's press Shift R and let's see what we get. And we'll run this for a second. We can already start to preview some of these AOVs. Let's maybe close this and let's go to our render outputs here. We can check out our distant light. Okay, so we can see maybe this is too dark. Let's go to some of these other ones. Let's go to our sun. And this is pretty dark as well. Let's try the sky. Most of these are pretty dark because when we add them together, we'll get the final result back. But we can see how smooth this result is in a relative short time. And from my experience, let's go here, this NVIDIA Optics Denoiser works really well in a lot of cases, but it works especially well with volumes. So I highly recommend using this whenever you want to render, especially layers like this, where it's just volumes. This is a match made in heaven. So from here, we can go ahead and probably for this, we can disable the depth of field. We can bring it back or we can use a defocus in Nuke ourselves. We might not want this just to preserve some of this detail. Let's maybe go to our beauty output here. We want to maintain as much detail in this layer as possible. So this will be fine for our background layer. And from here, we can make sure that the camera is pointing to the correct camera, and you can give this a file path and file name. Make sure you're rendering as EXR, and we can do a USD render up from here. Let's select render specific frame range, and we want to render from 1001, and we want the delegate here to be Karma XPU. And most of these settings should be fine for the most part, and you can hit render to disk. And for our foreground smoke, we can pretty much use the same setup. Let's go ahead and just duplicate all of these nodes. And inside this prune node, let's go ahead and let's get rid of all of these, the primitive patterns here. We want to keep our character because we want the smoke to be obscured by the character matte, and we will need to bring in our foreground smoke. Let's actually this replaced our character, so let's just manually add our character layer like so. So these are the layers that we need. Let's make a quick render preview and see how this works with the default settings. Okay, and again we forgot to bring in the lights as well, so let's also do /lights here. All right, so we can see that the character isn't actually, we are rendering with the matte, but this isn't entirely accurate because in our filters tab here, or rather in our, let's go to the image output and AOVs, we unchecked the beauty here. So we have to check this. And now we sort of have the correct result. Let's also make sure that we go back to our limits here and let's reset these to the default settings. And we'll keep the volume limit as 2. Now, we don't really need to see the materials on our character. In fact, we said that we're going to render this as a matte object. So let's do a geometry render settings after our prune. And let's point this to our character. And we'll go all the way down here to, let's go to shading, hold out mode, let's set or create, and we'll set this to matte. And now we should have the original result that we had. But now we don't have to worry about any reflections and stuff like that being computed on our character, and we are only exporting our smoke. And again, we can check all of our AOVs here, so we can check the distant one, the sky, and the sun, and also the indirect one, which is the bounces, and all of these are looking fine. We have a lot of stuff to play around with. For the most part, I think this is it for this foreground layer. So again, you can set a name for this and a path, and we can go ahead and render the same frame range here and render to disk. And let's also take care of the dust as well, since it will be again a very simple setup. We are actually, let's start with a fresh chain for this because we are going to need rather different settings. We are going to use a prune node and we want to keep only our character, and let's manually select our effects and let's select our dust, and we will prune unselected. So the reason we want our character as well is because we want the particles to be obscured by the matte of the character. So in fact we can go ahead and alt drag this render geometry settings for our character and connect this over here, and we'll just do a fresh set of karma render settings for this, and we'll make sure that this is 1080p and that this is pointing to the right camera. And again, you will have to set file path name and destination. Render engine, let's set this to XPU, and let's take a look at our default settings again. So press Shift R, and again we forgot to set up the lights. Let's bring in the lights as well. We don't really need any AOVs for this because it won't really give us that much of an advantage. We only need to make sure that this is using the correct camera settings. So let's go to the camera effects here, and for the motion blur, again, we will need to turn on this instance velocity blur. So I think this is all we need here, really. Let's preview the render, and this is it. So like I mentioned earlier, when we were creating this layer, we might have to go back and adjust the P scale. So we might want to make these slightly smaller, but I think this is actually looking pretty good. I'll leave this up to you. If you decide that these particles should be smaller, all you need to do is reduce the P scale on the particle simulation. So we can go ahead and duplicate our render up, and we can also render this to disk. And finally, we can take care of our character. Let's start again with another one of these prune nodes, and we don't need our effects dust. We will mainly focus on the character and the lights, but we do want the shadow of the smoke, of the foreground smoke, to affect the character. So we will need to bring in our foreground smoke as well. So let's go to our effects, to FG smoke, and this will be fine. Now we don't want to see the smoke, we only want the smoke to affect the shadow. So we will need some render geometry settings for the smoke. Let's maybe go up here and let's point this to our, again, we'll go to effects, FG smoke, and for the options that we need, we have to go to shading and we need this render visibility. So let's set or create, and the option that we want to choose here is going to be invisible to primary rays. So this will mean that the smoke itself will not be rendered, but any interaction that it has with objects will be rendered. So it will render all of the shadows caused by the smoke and also the reflections. So this is what we want, and maybe we can choose another frame here where the smoke is more in front of our character. Let's do another karma render settings node, and again I'll use HDTV and XPU, and we'll need to point to our camera here. So let's take a look at what we have. So hopefully we can see now this part here in the back, which is a lot more in shadow, and this is where our smoke is on top of our character. So we must maintain this interaction between the character and the smoke. Now for the AOVs that we need here, we do need quite a few AOVs. So let's go to the image output, and we can leave the beauty for this. To be honest, we probably don't need it, but we'll just keep this on. Let's go in our diffuse tab, and we will want the combined diffuse, and we will split this per light, and also then in reflections we will want the combined glossy reflections and also split this per light. In our lights and emission, we can probably check the direct emission to isolate our eyes, which has an emissive material, but we are going to create the eyes layer using a different way, so we don't have to worry about this. So with all of our diffuse and reflections AOVs, when we put them together, we'll recreate this render that we have here. We do need some extra utility AOVs, however, so we'll go inside the extra render vars here. Let's hit this plus. Let's first get our cryptomat for the material ID. So we'll scroll all the way here and we'll use cryptomat material name, and this automatically sets everything up. Let's use another one and we'll grab the UV information so we can map different textures inside of Nuke later. Let's rename this to UV. We'll leave the format as half tree, but for data type we want to use a tree float, or rather a float tree as it says over here. And the source type will be a prim var, and really the attribute name is UV, but when we switch over to Solaris, some of the attributes get renamed, and in this case UV is named ST. Alright, we don't have to worry about the pixel filter, and we need a couple more AOVs as well. Let's hit the plus one more time, and in order to create a Fresnel shader in Nuke, the Fresnel shader is basically just a dot product between the camera origin and the surface normals of the object. So we will have to grab, there is a preset that Houdini set up for us here for ray origin, and then we'll do one more for our normals. So let's scroll all the way down and let's select here, let's go to our N and we'll choose this smooth normal preset, and we will press Shift R, and let's take a look at some of these layers. So we have all of these combined diffuse and combined glossy reflection, and we can check some of these out. And the combined diffuse is mostly for our cloth and stuff like that, and then we have the combined glossy reflection, which is all of the specular and reflective information. And finally we have our crypto material. To separate all objects that have a different material, we have our geometric normal, and again this is used later in Nuke with our ray origin to create that Fresnel shader. So this will make sense in a second. And finally we also have our UV, and this is going to be all we need. So with this being said, we can duplicate this USD render up, and we can also render this to disk. And like I mentioned, if you don't want to set all of these renders up yourself, but you want to follow along with the compositing part, I've included all of the render files. You just have to download them following the link in the links file. And this was it for the Houdini part, so now let's jump over in Nuke. And now in Nuke we are going to start from the back and work our way towards the front. So this means that we are going to start with our background smoke. Now again, I've included these renders that I'm using here in the link in the downloads archive in case you want to follow along. So I'm just gonna start, I'm just gonna press Alt C and just duplicate this read node. So this will be the background noise. Let's start splitting up the AOVs and rebuild this. So we are going to use a shuffle, and just to reiterate this, if I press S and go to my project settings, these are the settings that I'm using. So 1001 to 1120, full HD 1080p, and inside the colors I'm using that Houdini configuration and color management set to OCIO. So back to our shuffle node, we want to see the AOVs that we are shuffling, so we're gonna go to this node label here, and in between brackets we will add the expression value in 1. Alright, and now if I go to the shuffle node and select one of these AOVs, let's start with our direct volume distant. We are also going to have the title of this AOV over here in the shuffle. Let's add a dot over here with control, and we will do a merge. Let's go ahead and duplicate both of these nodes with Alt C, and we are going to connect a new AOV here. So for the second one, we are going to use, I think we only need the sky and indirect volume. So let's select our direct volume sun, and I'll add another dot here. Let's set this merge operation. I'll set this to plus, and we are going to create one more duplicate with all of these nodes, and let's hook these up over here. And this final one, we want to use the indirect volume. So when we merge all of these together, and also let's reverse the order here. So it's the layer that we add is going to be layer A. So I can select the merge node and press Shift X on both of these. And if I compare the results, we have what we are looking for. We are missing the light information from our sky, but I didn't end up using that one in the original comp. So from here, really, it's just a matter of preference, more or less. I will go to the distant light pass over here. I'll drop a gray node with G, and I just want to crank up the contrast a little bit. So I'll decrease the gamma and increase the gain, and I'll add another gray node. And for this gray node, we can go to the color wheel here, and let's reduce the red, or rather the blue, and increase the red, so we make it a little bit brownish to match the overall look that we are going for. Let's look at our sun, and maybe for this one I can drop down a gray node and I can just increase the gain. And for the indirect volume, let's drop another gray node, and maybe for this we can increase the gamma a little bit, maybe the gain as well, make this pop a little bit more. So now if I go to the result and compare it with what we had, we skewed the color a little bit and we made the highlights pop some more, and we can, while selecting the end result here, I can increase the gain maybe and see exactly what we're doing. Maybe I can add some contrast here as well, and I think this indirect volume was maybe a little bit too high. We can also add another grade here, and in these shadows we can introduce maybe a little bit more red, just so we have more variation in the color. Okay, so this is a subtle difference here, but I think this is already starting to look pretty good. From our last merge result, we can add another grade, and maybe we can reduce the gamma overall and maybe increase the gain, just so we have a slight touch of contrast here. What I did in the original comp also was I created a noise layer, so I'm just gonna drop down a noise, and let's take a look at the settings here. I want to stretch this horizontally, so let's go to our scale, and I'll just increase the scale on the width. And I also want to animate the translation here on the X direction. So I will right click this value and let's add expression, which will be based on our frame number. So this is exactly how it would work in Houdini when you are mapping certain stuff to time or frame. And in this case, we're going to use, let's do frame, and let's multiply this by 50 and see what speed this will provide for us. All right, so maybe this is too slow. We kind of want to match the speed of our wind here. So let's go back and let's double this, or maybe even triple this. Let's use 150 as the expression. All right, so now this is more accurate to what we had, and we also want to introduce a little bit of animation on this Z value here, which will evolve our noise. Let's add another expression here based on our frame. For this one, this is a very sensitive value, so I will do frame and I will divide this. Let's maybe divide this by 20 and let's take a look. All right, so this is pretty close to our smoke simulation, I would say. Now I can drop down a gray node from our main chain and let's use the mask. Let's point the mask to our noise. And now if I drop down the gain, we have these darker patches on our smoke. Now let's maybe also go back to our noise and adjust the noise settings here. I might want to make this not as detailed, so I will decrease the linearity, and we can also play, I will increase the size a little bit. So we can see this noise pattern on top of our smoke layer, and when we play these two together, this will just add, this is very subtle, but it will add a little bit of detail and variation in our smoke simulation. And maybe I'll go back to this first gray node here, and let's bump up the brightness slightly more. All right, and we can preview this with and without this grading adjustment from our smoke. And one final thing that I like to do with a lot of these volume layers is we can drop down a blur from here. So I'll press B and I will increase the size of this blur quite a lot. Let's maybe use 200 and I will merge this on top of what we had. So I'll press M, drop down a new merge, and we can see when we add a blur on top, it kind of diffuses everything and fills up the screen a little bit more, but we still retain some of the sharp details of our original smoke simulation. Now, of course, by default, this is too much. So for this merge node, I can just drop down this mix value, which is just going to reduce the opacity of this blur layer. We just want to introduce a little bit of this blurring diffusion thing going on, and really I just think this looks a little bit better. One other thing that we can do with this layer, because we are not concerned with interactions with our characters, maybe we can even use some of the built-in motion blur that Nuke provides us. So after our last merge here with our shuffles, we can drop down a motion blur, and let's take a look at the settings here. Let's maybe decrease the shutter time to 0.4 and I'll increase the samples, and this just smears everything in the direction that the wind is blowing. And you might not want this, but I found that this helps slightly for this layer. And let's preview the final result and preview some other frames. And I think this looks fine. So we can compare it with what we had and what we end up with. So we can already see quite a big difference. And now we can layer the character on top. So let's grab our character layer from over here. So this is just the read node. I will just paste this over here so we can start fresh. This is our character, and let's just copy one of these shuffle nodes with our expression. I'll just Control C and paste this over here. So for our character, we will need to handle the shuffle nodes a little bit differently because we have alpha information and we have to deal with the edges of our character. So if I press A, we can see the alpha. The way that we handle color correction with shuffles in this case is going to be by unpremolting all of our AOVs and then premolting the final result. And this is because we have aliasing on our edges. So you see, if I zoom in real close here on the edge of our character, we have this gradient of a few pixels that slowly go from white to black, and this area over here, which has a lot of these gray values, will cause issues for us when we are going to color correct. So let's go back to our shuffle. Let's bring back some of the AOVs that we need. Let's start with combined diffuse distant, and to get rid of this aliasing here, we will also want to bring in on this second layer. Let's use our alpha from the original render, and let's plug this in our output as well. So now if I press A, our AOV also has this alpha information, and if I drop an unpremol node after the shuffle, this will now get rid of our aliased edges. So we can see as I disable this, this is what we get. And now after this, we can drop down a grade node and do our color correction like so. And at the end, when we put all of the AOVs together, we will bring in our aliased edges back. So we'll see this in a second. Let's maybe go ahead and drop down a merge from here. And let's grab both of these layers, so the shuffle and unpremult, press Alt C, and let's hook these over here, and let's connect these up and reverse the order here with Shift X. Alright, and slowly build our network. For this second shuffle, let's use the combined diffuse sky, and let's grab all of these, press Alt C, let's hook these up. For this third one, let's grab our final combined diffuse, which is our sun, and I'll get rid of this gray node for now, and I'll grab all of these 3 nodes and I'll press Alt C to duplicate all of them, and let's connect these again. And here we'll need a new merge, so let's do a merge from here and link everything up. And all of these merge nodes, actually I should have set the operation to plus before I copied them, so let's just I'm just gonna do this real quick. So I'll go over each and every one of these and set them to plus. So now for our other 3 duplicates, we'll bring in the, let's see, our combined glossy reflection. So reflection distance, let's go reflection sky, and reflection for our last one, we'll use this sun one. Okay, so when we add everything together, we can see we get the final result. So if I compare my original render with this result, we have virtually the same thing. And now, like I mentioned, let's bring back our aliased edges. All we need to do is copy the alpha from our original render to this new result. So from over our last node here, let's drop down a copy node with K, and I'll point the B layer to our original render. I'll add a new dot here. So again, over here where I'm connecting this copy node, this is pointing to the original render here. Let's go over to our copy node, and we want the A layer to be the original render, so we will reverse the order with Shift X. And if I press A, we have this original alpha now, and we can use a pre-mult, and now this will bring back our edges. And also, because we have the alpha channel back, let's do a merge and let's place this on top of our smoke. And now we have the character set up. We can go through all of the AOVs and let's start adjusting these. So we can drop down a grade node, and it's the same process for all of these layers. And this is really the fun part, doing the look dev like so. So maybe I want to focus more on my sunlight. I can drop down the diffuse light slightly. And for all of these grade nodes, I probably want to use a little bit more red, and I can reduce the blue channel and increase the red. Let's go to our sky one and see what happens when we can also probably reduce this a little bit. We don't want so much bounce lighting from our sun, or rather our sky, and we do want it from our sun. So with this grade node on our sun layer, we can either increase this, maybe drop down the gamma a little bit. Let's go to our glossy reflection layers. This is the distant one. I can maybe drop this down slightly. For our sky, maybe we can also drop this as well. And again, we want more emphasis on our sun. So maybe I can increase the sun value here, and we can see this brings up our light that's coming from the side. So already we have a better integration now with our smoke. If I drop down another merge here just to demonstrate this, and let's point this to our character, this would be our default look without any modifications, and this is with all the grading adjustments. So we really have control by splitting up the lights in this way and adjusting directly in comp, because we don't have to bake any decisions, so we have to re-render it in Houdini and stuff like that. So this is really the optimal way to work. Let's get rid of this merge. Now I also want to add a little bit more dust on this metal here, just to sort of blend him even more on this very chaotic desert sandstorm shot. But really I just want to show you some of the many cool things that we can do directly in Nuke to affect our render. So I'm gonna grab a scratched metal textures that I got from Megascans, and really you can use any texture that you want. So let's go ahead and copy this Let's preview this. This is the texture that I got. You can find a lot of these textures online, even for free. So really, any kind of tile textured with scratch surfaces will work just fine for this. Or you can even create some noise layers directly here in Nuke that you can use instead of a texture. So to map this on our camera, we will need the UV pass that we've also exported in the renders. I will duplicate one of the shuffle nodes, and let's connect this over here now to our main render, and I'll bring this to the side. Maybe I'll arrange it like this. And let's let's grab our UV extra, and from our texture we will drop down an ST map. So this will be our source, and we'll point the ST map to our shuffle, and for the UV channels let's use RGB. And here we have it. So if I press play, we can see now that the texture sticks on our character. We can safely ignore what's happening on the cloth here. This is mainly me not setting up the UVs properly inside the Houdini probably, but we are not really interested in this part either way. We only want this to affect our metal. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and use the crypto pass to separate our materials. So I'll create a duplicate of the shuffle here. Let's also point this back to our render, and we don't need a shuffle for this. So let's get rid of this, and let's use a crypto matte node, and let's point this to our main render, and we can see the separate ID that we get for each object that has a different material assignment. And to select the one that we are interested in, I'll just hold down Control and I will click on the ID that we need, and we see if I press A, this will create an alpha pass for us with that object. And from our ST map now we can drop down another merge node, and let's use, for the merge operation, we'll use in. So now we have this scratch surface only on our metal, and we can do a merge. And for this merge layer, we probably should merge this before our pre-mold here. We really want this pre-mold to be the last layer that we add to our character, just to ensure that we maintain those aliased edges. And for the operation here, we want to use plus. And let's take a look at the final result that we get. Now obviously we have to adjust this texture a little bit, so let's go to our read node for our texture. I'll drop down a gray node, and let's reverse the values here. So I will decrease the white point and increase the black point until this goes kind of the other way around, and we want to make the scratches this white color. And we can play around with the gamma a little bit as well. And let's preview the result now. So we are getting slightly closer. After our in node, where we mask it with the CryptoMed, let's add a gray node, and we can further refine this here. So I'll drop down the gain, and I'll add another gray node, and let's skew the color here towards our red tone. So I'll decrease the blue channel and increase the red, so we match it with our desert colors. Maybe we can decrease the gain even more, and let's maybe go back to our grade for the texture, and let's do some adjusting like this. Okay, now obviously you should spend a little bit more time to really integrate this better, but for now I will leave this as it is. And one other thing that I want to show you, and this isn't maybe completely necessary for this shot, but we can see that with this texture mapping we really shouldn't get this much color right on the edges of our surface, and over here as well where the metal meets this piece of cloth. If I look, this weird edge that we're getting here is from our UV, because we have motion blur baked in this UV pass, and this is noticeable here where we see this gradient for the pixels. This might make it hard where we have a lot of intersecting objects here for our mapping to properly integrate. And what we can do here for this layer is we can use a Fresnel shader to darken the texture that's around the edges of the object. So to create this Fresnel shader, this is where we have to use our other passes. So I'll just drop another dot here. Let's add another shuffle. And actually we don't need the alpha for these ones, so I'll get rid of this connection. And for the other shuffle that we need, the other AOVs, let's bring in our ray origin and let's create a duplicate, and let's point this here as well, and we'll bring our normal. So when we do a dot product between these two layers, this works exactly like how it would in Houdini. We are going to get a gradient based on which normals align with the direction of our camera. So if I drop a dot product from here, and this will be a vector 3 signature, we'll place this here, and we might not see this right away in the result. And this is because our values are super high here. Let's maybe do a clamp for both of these. So I'll add a clamp here, and we can already start to see this. Let's duplicate this one and also clamp the values of our N. Alright, so now maybe we can see this better. If I drop down a grade node and decrease the gamma and play around with the white and black point, we can see this Fresnel result that we get. And in a lot of other render engines, including Karma, this is called a camera facing ratio, but really I'm just used to calling it Fresnel from Redshift. But this is all this is really, it's just highlighting the areas that are facing the camera more, which is exactly what we need. We can see that as I adjust these values, we can isolate these parts of the objects here that are ignoring the edges. So we'll use this as a mask, and let's go back to before we did our grading. So after our masking here, after this merge, we can just do another grade, and let's point this to our dot product result over here. Maybe I'll bring these closer, and let's preview the result of the pre-mults. And with this new grade node, if I drop the gain now, we can start to see our edges here disappearing. And let's use, as a mask input, let's use the RGBA red channel. And we actually want the reverse of this, so let's invert our result. And this is what we get. I can set the gain here to 0 and go back to the grade node of our dot product, and I can start to play around with the values directly here. So if I check the result now, with and without, we can hopefully see that this allows us to integrate our texture a little bit better. Now, all of this wasn't super necessary. If I disable this layer, when we add our other smoke layer and the dust and everything on top, this won't be super noticeable, but I still wanted to showcase some of these techniques in case you might need them for a project later down the road. And overall, I might want to bring down the gain here. We really want this to be quite a subtle effect. So this will be our character, and let's go ahead and add our foreground smoke. And now that I'm seeing this, I might want to go back to my background smoke, and for this grade node, I'll drop down another grade node, and this is a little bit too red, so I might just want to add a slightly more yellow, so I'll just increase the green channel here. For our foreground smoke, we want to use the same setup that we have for our background smoke. So I'll just go ahead and copy all of these layers. I'll press Ctrl C and just bring them down here and grab the read node from my original comp with the foreground smoke. So this layer, let's press Ctrl C and I'll paste this here. And because this is kind of the same volume layer, we should maintain all of our AOVs here with the direct volume, distance, sun, and indirect volume. And we don't have indirect volume here. Let's swap this for our sky layer, and let's merge all of these together. And we have kind of the same result. Of course, we copied this with our grade nodes as well, but this will be fine for now. And we can merge this on top of what we have, and let's set this merge operation. We can keep this operation as over, but what we're gonna do is let's set this to plus. And the problem here when we set this layer to plus is that we lose any obscuration that happens for our character. So we are no longer getting the thickness of our smoke. So the end result here that we get from the combination of our AOVs, if I press A, we don't have any alpha information, but our original render has this alpha information. So just as an example, if I merge this on top of our chain without processing our AOV. So if I look at this result, and let's reverse the order here, and I look at the result we get after we separate the AOVs. Now, if we ignore all of the color corrections, we can see that this one obscures our character a lot more, especially in these areas over here. We get the correct result. We can see that the character is a lot less bright. So to bring some of these obscuration back, we can use the alpha channel from our render. So this layer here to darken everything before we add the smoke on top here. So let's just drop a gray node and point this to our render, and let's preview the RGB channels. If I drop the gain here to 0 and make this completely black, if I do a merge and merge this over our character, because we have on this gray node, because we have this alpha channel, this merge will only affect our render where we have all of these white values. So where this has strong white values, we will have a darker image. So as a result, we can go here and we can see, we can preview this with or without, and we can see that everything is way darker. So this is really just isolating the obscuration that happens from our smoke. So now when we preview this with the smoke on top, we have the correct result. So we have now what we would have had originally if I just merged this on top directly. Only now we can add another gray node here, which runs only on the alpha channel. And if I play around with the black and white point, we can further adjust this obscuration. So I can, if I increase the gamma, we can see we have more obscuration. We can also play around with the point and the black point, and we can sharpen up this alpha contrast. So if I preview the alpha channel, we can determine exactly how strong we want the obscuration to be, so the darkening. But it's probably best to preview this from our end result here. And again, if I disable this, we can see the result that we get. So we can come back to this in a second. Let's maybe just take care of some of our gradings for the volume. So I might want to increase most of these, and okay, this looks fine. Let's maybe crank up the contrast here as well. And for our sky, we might want to decrease this a little bit, and let's also make this more red as well. And let's take a look. Okay, so now this is starting to look fine. And one other thing that I did was I grabbed another copy of this distance. So with a grade node, I can just merge this on top of everything, and let's set this to plus, and I can use this for some very strong highlights. So I can decrease, let's maybe preview the result here. So for this grade node, I can decrease this and just get isolate a little bit more of the highlights of this smoke. So if I preview this, we just get a slight more kick in our foreground smoke. And finally, we'll do the same thing that we did earlier. So from our merge shuffles here, let's drop down a blur node and we'll blur everything and just merge this on top. Let's preview the result. Let's increase this slightly and we'll just merge this here and reduce this mix overall. So this again will add even more diffusion for everything, and we can see these parts over here. It really helps to blend everything together. This blurring diffusion thing is also something of a fake GI look, which is why it usually works so well. And a very cool thing that happens is also that it brightens up the blacks, so they're not completely dark, which is a little bit unnatural. So I always do this blur layer trick. Let's move forward with the eyes now, and for this we will need to reference the crypto matte from our original render. So I'll use a postage stamp node, which is essentially like the object merge in Houdini. Point this to this render of the character, and I'll bring this down below so we can work on our eye layer over here, and I'll just hide this connection with Alt-H, and we will use a crypto matte node from here. Let's go ahead and hold down Control and select our eyes. So now we have this alpha layer, and we can turn this into a white RGBA layer. If I drop down a shuffle, I can grab this alpha layer, and while holding down Alt, I'll connect this to all of our nodes. So we just have this layer here. Essentially, if I were to merge this directly exactly on top, we can see we have this result. Now this isn't what we want. Let's get rid of the merge, and obviously we'll have to make this green. We'll do this in a second. What I want to do, and this is just a cool trick that I found along the way, to add a little bit more gradient so we have a stronger value that's in the center. We can do a blur, and I'll increase the value here slightly, and I'll merge this on top of the shuffle. And if I set the operation to multiply, we can see we have this really cool gradient happening here, and I can adjust the value of the blur node to determine the value of this gradient. And also, if I do a grade node after the multiply, I can increase the black point and make this even more apparent, even more obvious. Let's maybe actually play around with the gamma and the white point. So we end up with something like this. We can see this maybe better on this side. I might want to adjust this blur node more. The reason that we do this is simply so it's not just a flat color, which can kind of look a little bit weird. It's always just better to have more variation. So now we can make this green and add our glow, but one other thing that I want to do before that, the problem when we do this operation is if I look at my alpha channel now, this also affects our alpha. So we will drop down a copy node with K, and let's reference back our original alpha from the CryptoMath layer. So let's do A to B, reverse the order, and if I press A, we have the original alpha now, so we can merge this properly on top. So now when we add a grade node, I can go to the gain here and decrease these channels and increase the green. And maybe also I want to leave some of this red value, so we have a bit of yellow maybe, so some variation in these greens. Let's do something like this, and I can merge this now on top and see the result. Let's set the operation to plus, and let's take a look. Pretty okay. Now what I want to happen is I want to kind of fake a little bit of the obscuration we would get from our smoke. So if I preview this result as it is, because this eyes layer is on top of everything, we won't get any interaction with the smoke that physically would be on top of our eyes. So we should have some obscuration from our foreground smoke. And we can use our foreground smoke layer over here to darken the values of our eyes, but I decided to use a noise layer instead. So in fact, I'm going to grab this noise layer that we created here. I'm just gonna go ahead and grab and duplicate this over here. And for this layer, I'll just decrease the size slightly. And let's do this before we do this grading. Before we turn the eyes greens, let's use a merge and let's set the operation here to multiply. So if I turn this, let's maybe reverse the order. If I turn this on and off, we can see this result, and I can increase the gain of the smoke and maybe the lacunarity as well, and we can see the result that we get. So this is the noise that's on top. Okay, and maybe this is a little bit too fast now for this effect, so I can go to this transform option here and let's reduce the speed. And if we go back to our multiply, if I preview some frames now, we can see how the eyes start to flash a little bit. So we have all of this variation in our values that kind of mimic this foreground smoke layer. So now if I look at the result, we sort of have this fake obscuration going on for our eyes. So they're not entirely emissive throughout the whole shot. And this becomes a lot more obvious when we add the glow and the flare. So let's do that. I'll drop down a crop from the grade, and then we can use the AP glow node. So this is a free exponential glow available on Wikipedia, and you can find a link for this in the links file from the downloads. Let's maybe reduce the source white. I'll leave the response as it is, and I'll increase the intensity slightly, and we'll just merge this with a plus operation on top, and let's preview the final result. We might want to maybe increase this even further, and we can see that with this extra layer of noise, we also get a lot more variation variation in the glow as well, which looks a lot cooler. And for the flaring effect, we can drop down a radial, and I will squeeze this a little bit. So let's turn back on our overlays, and I'll hold down Control and grab the handle below here, and I'll just squeeze both of these together like so. I'll drop down a convolve node. Let's use this as our filter and point the image to our glow. So let's take a look at the result, and we can also merge this after our glow, and we can see now the result. Let's set this to plus and preview the final thing here, and we also have now this very subtle layer of flaring. You can obviously still, if I drop down a gray node after the convolve, we can increase the gain and the gamma to make this even more obvious, but I want this fairly subtle. I'll do something like this. Now we need to spend a bit more time adjusting everything, especially our noise and maybe the original grade. I might want to introduce even more green here, but I'll leave it up to you to decide. And with this, we pretty much have all of our render layers. All that's left to do is some post-processing. But before we go to that, I just want to show you a cool trick that I did in the original render. We can, over here where we determine the obscuration for our foreground smoke, this alpha channel. So again, it's this layer that darkens everything. What I did here was I added another grade node, and again I will set this on the alpha, and I want to use this to darken everything a lot more. So maybe I can decrease the black point and I'll increase the gamma like so until we obscure it, until we obscure our character quite a lot. So let's maybe do something like this. And I animated the mix value in the beginning of our animation. So we went from a mix value of 1, I animated this to 0, and we can see that as I decrease this mix value, bring back our character. So in the beginning, it's a lot more emphasis on the silhouette of the character and the eyes, and then we can bring some of the focus back on everything else. So this is what I did. I just right click to set a keyframe for a value of 1 on the mix, and I went forward maybe 50 frames. So at frame 1050, we can add another keyframe for a value of 0 here. So now our character is slowly fading in through the smoke throughout the first 50 frames of our shot. And now that I'm saying this, we can probably adjust our flare a little bit, or maybe we can adjust the glow instead. Let's set this to a slower, we'll set this to a lower intensity. So for our post-process effects, I'll start with an overall grade node, and I'll just increase the gamma, increase the contrast a little bit, and let's punch up the gain slightly. And what I want to do is add some defocus to this. So let's drop down a defocus node, and I want to randomize this defocus value. I want this to sort of flicker a little bit, just to kind of match this shaky camera movement, so it feels kind of like it's coming in and out of focus. And we can do this with an expression. Let's right click and add expression, and we can start with a random. So let's use random value here that's based on our frame. And if I leave this as it is and we can check our curve editor, we can see that by default this is a really chaotic value. So to spread out this pattern here, let's go back to our expression. I can also press equal sign on my keyboard. We can lower this seed value for our frame. So if I divide this by 5, we essentially spread out this randomness. So maybe I want to reduce the frequency even more. Let's divide this by a value of 7. Okay. So I think this might be fine. Now I want to also affect the amplitude overall, because we can hardly notice a value of 1 pixel. So let's go back to our expression and let's multiply this with 10. Alright, so now we can actually see this in our result here, and this will be fine for now. And what I want to happen is that I want this defocus value to be 0 most of the time and just have these occasional bumps that's driving this whole thing. So we can see that as this expression is currently, we never really have a value of 0. We are always kind of in between 1 and 10. So what we can do here is, going back to the expression, I can put all of this inside a parenthesis, and if I subtract a value of 5, we are also pushing these in the negative values. Now I don't really want negative values, I want all of the negative values on this side to be clamped to 0. So let's go back and let's also clamp this entire value. We will do a clamp here for this entire value, and let's add a comma at the end here and clamp from 0 to 10. And close parenthesis, hit OK, and now we can see all the values are clamped. So we'll have these occasional spikes that go up to a value of 5, and all we have to do if we want to increase this amplitude is go back here and let's maybe say that we want to work from 0 to 10. We can multiply this value here with 20 and we can subtract a value of 10. So let's maybe just render a few frames here and see how this looks. Alright, so now we have this occasional defocusing to go along with our shaky camera, and we can also see how our eyes start to flicker a little bit, which helps to sell more this idea that the smoke is in front of our character. Another thing that we can add on top of everything here as a post-processing effect is a bit of a lens dirt texture. So I grabbed one, I have one over here which I used in the original example, which looks like this. And again, you can find a lot of these textures if you just type on Google, I think, lens dirt. You will really find a lot of these kinds of textures. Now we can simply merge this on top, and if I set the operation to plus, this is what we get. We can maybe drop down a grade node, and of course we'll have to decrease the scale. I might decrease the gain as well, and let's add another grade node, and also make this, thin this towards the colors that we need. We can do something like this. Now I only want this to affect the fringes of our comp, so I'll just drop down with O. I can place down a roto and I'll just make a selection here. Let's add a blur to this and feather this out, and we can drop down another grade node and point this mask to our roto and just decrease the gain so we don't have this much in front of our character and more towards the edges. And I just realized we forgot about our dust layer, so this should be before all of our post-processing. So after our eyes, we can go ahead and add our dust as well, and it's going to be this layer here. Let's not forget this. This will be a very simple add operation as well. In fact, it's kind of the same thing that we are doing here with our lens there, to be honest. So I can grab all of these layers, Control C, and paste them here, and let's point to our dust, and we will merge this on top with a plus operation. And let's take a look here. Before post-processing, we will need to adjust our grading, so let's increase this. And for this grade, we still want to use this roto shape here because we don't want to obscure our character too much. We want to keep this area, especially around the eyes, more in focus. So for this grade node, I might want to increase this, and let's make this even more red to something like this. But this is pretty much it for the dust layer. A very simple add operation, like I mentioned. Maybe add more yellow here. We can use another copy of this dust. Let's drop down a grade node, point to our dust render, and use this as a sort of layer for highlights. So I'll increase the black point here and decrease the white, so we just have these tiny specks of lights. And I'll merge this with our result and set this to plus, just so we have a small bump in our highlights. Preview the final look. So this is what this extra layer will do for us. And again, it's always just better to have some variation. And going back to the end of our comp here, a couple more things that we can add here is going to be a vignette effect. I have a custom vignette node from Nukepedia as well, which you can find again in the links file. Let's use AP vignette. So this is just to darken the edges, which is a very obvious thing to do if you ask me, especially for this kind of character focus shot. And we can play around with the settings here a little bit, decrease the fall off, and play around with the aspect ratio and size. And we'll do something like this. And one other extra thing, we can add some chromatic aberration. And my favorite node for this is again from Nukepedia, which is going to be Let's use chromatic spin. And this is a very subtle effect, but I think it works really nice in this case, so I decided to use this. This is completely up to you if you want to use chromatic aberration or not. I might just want to decrease the size and protect the center a little bit more. So it's mostly again for our edges here. And this is pretty much it. The only thing left to do here is use a crop node so we can get the anamorphic format, which is this one at the end. 2.35 and 1, and I can hide these controls with Q so we can preview the final result. And this is pretty much it for the comp, and with this we have reached the end of this course. So I hope you found this course useful and that you learned some new things, and hopefully we'll see each other again in a new course. Let's take a look and see how we can take the exact same renders that we have already and turn this from a sandstorm, a desert sandstorm, into a winter blizzard like this. So this is the difference between the comps. And if I pull back here, we can see that we are really using, this is over here to the left, is going to be the desert sandstorm variation, meaning our original comp. And over here to the right, we have this winter version. And we can see that these follow almost exactly the same structure. Really, all this is, at the end of the day, is just adjusting our gray nodes from a dark orange to a light blue. And in between, in some of these places, we have a bit of changes in our structure, but for the most part, we can see that these are almost exactly the same as far as the building blocks are concerned. So we are going to start with our original comp over here, and we can see that if I go to the result of this VG smoke, we have everything in this dark orange color, so we might as well just start from the top, and I will preview the result of our combined shuffles over here, which is this. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all of our gray nodes and start with each of these by dropping down a saturation node and setting the saturation here to 0. So I want all of these passes. Let's maybe just drop down a gray node here, and let's preview this, and I will just increase the gain and the gamma. And this is really what we are going to do for a lot of these shuffle nodes. So for this other one, we'll drop another saturation, set to 0, drop a gray node, increase the gamma. All right, and for the third one as well, saturation 0. Let's preview this, and let's increase the gain here. So this is our fill one, this third shuffle layer here. All right, so if we preview the result now, we can already see that it's starting to look like a snow blizzard. We want to introduce a bit of blue on all of these passes, simply because if I want this shot to be in the middle of the day with a clear sky, the snow will most likely reflect some of that sky color, and that's where we get a lot of our blue colors. So after all of these gray nodes, let's start with the first one. And for our shuffle layers, let's actually go to our node settings here, and in between brackets, I will type in the expression value in 1, so we see what we are shuffling here. Now we have the information here in our shuffle node. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this for our second shuffle node and our third one as well, just because it's a little bit easier to work this way. So for our distant light, let's go to our grade, and let's go to the gain here and reduce the green and the red and just increase the blue. Maybe this is a little bit too much. I'll bring in some of the red back. Let's preview all of these for now, and let's grab this third one, and I'll press D so we can disable this, and now we can focus on our sun. Let's also, for our sun, it doesn't make sense to tint this in a blue spectrum, but we are going to do this anyway because it doesn't really make sense to have this yellow color. And maybe for our sun, we might also want to introduce more contrast. So I'll just decrease the gamma and increase the gain, and also use my multiply here to push these values. We can see over here, we get these very nice highlights when we increase the gain. And let's bring our indirect volumes. So this will act like a fill light, and I'll drop down a grade. Again, we will do our blue coloring here, something like this. And I might want to make this a little less obvious. Okay, so if I disable this, maybe this is too much. Let's do something like this, preview some more frames. and I'm pretty happy with this. Obviously, you are free to experiment with the values and the grade nodes, but this is overall the process that we are going to use for most of the layers. We have our second grade node here, which introduces more noise and variation. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this, so I'll just delete this. We don't really want to have these dark spots all around because we want this to be a brighter scene overall. We have a secondary layer here which pushes our highlights. If I look at the gray node which points to our distant light, we can see that we might want to increase the gain here to something like this, and this will be our highlights. So I'm going to keep this. I think it's pretty cool. Another great node after everything, just to push the gain, or rather the gamma a little bit. I might as well keep this. And then we have this blur trick that we keep doing, which softens up everything. So I definitely want to keep this. Looking at this, I might want to introduce even more blue color, but for now, this will be fine. We can move forward and let's take a look at our character. So if I just paste the character as it is, we can see that this doesn't blend at all with what we have. So we are going to have to adjust a lot of things here. This layer that we created that's adding a lot of these extra detail on our metallic arms, so the dust scratches. We are going to recreate a different layer that's going to act as a coating of snow on our entire character. So in fact, I'm going to just grab all of these nodes here that represent this extra layer that we created. So I'm just going to grab all of these and get rid of it. And for now, we are only going to focus on our character. Let's go ahead and let's start by removing all of our grade nodes. So really we are going to start the grading from scratch. Okay, and we are going to go one by one. So we are going to look at the diffuse distant and let's drop down a grade. I definitely want to increase this color here. So I'm going to grab the gain and the gamma and just push these out by a lot and add another grade node, and we might as well introduce our blue colors right now. So I'm just going to reduce the red and increase the blue, so we end up with something like this. We don't want to go too much into the blue tint. We want to keep it fairly realistic, I would say. Let's look at our diffuse sky. So let's drop another grade and let's push this out. We also want a lot of this sky color as well. We can see that this is already tinted blue, and this is because directly in our render, we have absorbed this blue color from the sky. But I will probably, this is, so for this gray now, for the luminosity, or rather the values, we probably don't want this to be this bright. So let's keep it like this. And let's not add a second gray node for our blue colors for now. Let's take a look at the result. All right, it's pretty good. Let's look at the result with our diffuse sun. So we also want to push these out. Let's go for another gray node, and I'll just increase the gamma. So I always start with the gamma because this brightens everything a lot more. And for this as well, because this is too yellow from our sun, I might as well drop a saturation before our grade and set this to 0. Let's go back here and let's add a second grade node. And again, just push out the blue values. Okay, let's preview this. So it's already starting to look pretty good. Let's look at our reflection layers. Add a grade node. Let's push these out. I think this is already looking pretty good by just adjusting the gamma. For our reflection sky, let's go ahead and again push out the gamma. And we need to get rid of this yellow. So another saturation here set to 0 and another grade node after our first gray node, and we will just push in some of these blue values. Right, so if I look at this, it's already starting to look pretty good. Let's look at the result merged on top of our snow, and I already like how this is looking, and we really honestly just eyeballed all of these values. And because I previously did this comp before recording, I kind of know what the values on the gray nodes are supposed to be. But the proper way to do this would be to preview the final result, so with the snow, and then go one by one layer. So if I disable all of these merge nodes here with D, we can go one by one so we can see what the distant light provides, and then I would enable the second shuffle and do our grading adjustments and go forward to the next merge node and then do this adjustment. So probably on this diffuse sun, the grading for the values are a little bit too high. I might want to drop this down a bit, and maybe for our sky as well. Then I can enable the reflections, and I might want to increase the reflections, to be honest, to something like this. And let's enable the last one. And again, I might want to push the gain here a little bit more. I think it's already starting to look pretty good. It's starting to blend in a lot more with our snow. Of course, after all of these merge nodes where we recreate the beauty, we can add a gray node on top of everything. And I might want to push in our black values a little bit so we can go to our lift values here. And I want to just introduce in our very dark spots a little bit of blue. So I will just increase this. Obviously, this is too much. Let's do 0.01 instead, maybe even less. Let's do 0.05, something like this. And let's also introduce a little bit of green as well. So 0.0025, half of this. All right, and this will just bump up our darks a little bit just because if I look at this dark spot, it doesn't really blend in with our lighting in the shot. And of course, we can pile on more gray nodes here. So I might want to gain everything up slightly like this. And I think this will be fine for now. We can come back later because we have to add on top the other layers as well. Let's take a look at how we can create a coating of snow over this character. We are going to start the same way that we did with Nesty map by using the UV channels. So let's grab one of these shuffle nodes. I'll just paste this over here. Let's point to our render and let's arrange these nodes slightly. Let's go ahead and look at our UVs. So let's shuffle this UV extra. And now this will be in our RGB slot. So for our snow texture, I got one from Megascans. And it's going to be this frost textures from the imperfection categories. You can use really whatever textures you want. So if you have bridge, you can use this texture, or you can grab one from any place that you know, or you can even use a noise texture directly inside of Nuke. So if I drop down a noise, we can use this as well. So if you adjust some of these settings here, you can get a very similar result. But for my case, I'm just going to use this texture that I already have, which looks like this. All right, so we are going to map this on our character. Let's drop down a ST map node. This will be our source, and our ST map will point to our shuffle. And for the UV channels here, because we shuffle the UVs into our RGB channels, we are going to use the RGB channels for the UV channels here. So this almost works. We can see that it's the same result that we had when we added our dust scratches in the previous lesson. We do have this problem on the cloth of the character. The mapping is not entirely correct here. What's happening here if we look at the UV channels, and I'm going to make a separate video about this where I go a little bit more in depth, so I'm just going to give you the short version of what's happening. We can see if I look at the pixel information, so I'm just going to go ahead and hold Control Shift and sample a region here. Let's sample this region. We can see that the values on the red and green channels, which is our U and V coordinates, these the red channels go above a value of 1. So we have 1.3, and the ST map node wants to use values between 0 and 1. So we need basically a way to remove this 1 in front of our value. So this 1.32 value becomes 0.32. And to do this, we can just drop down an expression node. And for our expression, we are going to type R, which will grab the values of our red channels as it is. And then we are going to say floor, and in between parentheses, we are going to type R again. So now if I sample this, we can see if I do Control Shift drag, now we have a value of 0.31. And if I disable this, we have the original 1.31 value. So this 1 that's in front of the decimals becomes 0. And now if I look at the result of our ST map, we can see that we have the proper tiling. Now, we might as well do this for our green channels as well, so we can avoid having values over 1, and we are going to say G minus floor and in parentheses G. And again, I will go a little bit more in depth into a separate video that I plan to make on the STMap node. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about these expressions in that video. So we are going to go back to our result, and we have the proper mapping now. And we can see that this pattern is quite big here, so we can tile our textures if we add a grade node after the UV channels, so over here. And if I reduce the white point, we can see that we make this pattern smaller, so we are essentially just repeating the pattern over our character. So this works exactly how it would work in a 3D software where you just increase the tiling of the texture. So let's maybe set the white point to a value of 0.35. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Now, this texture, if I do a merge and I grab this and just place it over our character, obviously we are not going to get the correct result here. We can also preview this with our smoke in the background. We really want this texture to only affect the right side of our character to sort of match the direction from where the wind is blowing our snow. And in order to isolate this right part of our character, we can use our normal channels, or rather our normal AOV. So from over here, before our UV shuffling, let's go ahead and copy paste this node, and we want to grab our normal AOV. Okay, and for the normals, if we grab our red channel, so if I press R, we can preview our red channel, we see that we already have this sort of gradient that's across the side of our character. And really what we can do here is simply remap these values. Now I'm going to shuffle, let's press R again so we can go to our regular display. I'm just going to place our red channel in the alpha slot. So if I press A, we have the same thing here. And I will drop down a grade node, and let's set the channels to only affect our alpha. And if I play around with the white and black point, we can control how this gradient affects our character. So I'm going to kind of reverse the gradient that we get by pushing the black point out and bringing the white point in. And we can also now play around with the gamma as well, and also the gain. So if I do this, we can start to see we get exactly the result that we want, which is we are isolating the right side of our character. So I'm just going to adjust these values a little bit like so. And from our SD map, let's press A again to go to the RGB display. I'm going to drop a gray node and point the mask to our alpha. And now if I drop down the gain, let's also invert this result. And now this texture will match this direction that the wind is blowing. And if I go to the final comp, we can see this here. And I think this is already looking pretty good. If I disable this, we can see the result. Now, another thing that we have to take into account here is we can see if I disable this, this part over here is a lot more dark. So we are not really receiving the shadows from our renders. And we can just grab the information that we have from our merged results. So after our last grade here for our character, I'll do another grade node and place it over to the side and connect this here. And I'm just going to create a contrasty look here to isolate our shadows. I'm going to push the white point in and maybe increase the gamma here just so we have a very contrasty difference between shadows and highlights. So let's do something like this. And I want to also do a white clamp as well. And now we can use this information, and we are going to point to the red channel to mask what we have the result of our SD maps. So over here, after our grade, I'll add another grade. Let's point to our highlights that we created here with this grade node. And for the mask, we are going to look at our red because this thing that we created doesn't have this highlight information on our alpha channel. So we are going to use the red channel instead. And now we can just simply decrease the gain, and let's also invert the result. Okay, so we can see now that as I drop down the gain, we start to get a little bit more of our shadows back from the original render. So if I look at the final result now, if I disable this gray node, we see that we have a much more blended result. And if I turn the whole STMap thing on and off, we end up with this. So we still have some texture detail in our shadowy spots, but it's not as obvious. And again, this is with the shadows and this is without. And we can still do from here another gray node, and we can adjust the gain here directly, or maybe we want more contrast. And there's a lot of options that we have right now. We can go around and let's play with this highlight path that we created. So if I look at the final result and adjust this gray node, we can maybe increase or rather decrease the power of our shadows slightly. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this result. And we can see over here, especially if I disable this layer, we can see how much this extra texture helps us to blend in our character with the environment. All right, so we can move forward and let's take a look at our foreground smoke. Our first merge here will be for the overall darkening. So this is what controls the thickness of the fog that's on top. We probably want less of this, so we can go to our grade here for the alpha. Let's preview the result with A, and I'm just gonna go ahead and I want to make this a little bit thinner. So let's get rid of some of this brightness like so. And let's just preview the result at the end here, and I'll press A. Of course, we will need to do the grading for all of these layers. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of the gray nodes. And we want to do the same thing really that we did for our background smoke. So let's add a saturation set to 0 for all of these. And I'm just gonna go ahead and copy paste this saturation with a value of 0. And let's go to our first one, add a grade node. Let's increase the gain. This will be our distant light. We'll do something like this. With a second grade node, we are going to bring in the blues. Let's go forward, and this will be our sky. So of course we will need to increase this as well, maybe not too much. Let's leave this as it is and go to our, let's take a look at the shuffles here. We might need the expression to see what we're shuffling. This is the sun. So for this, let's do a gray node, and I'm just gonna push out the gain here a lot more so we get more highlights. Let's take a look. Let's also add another gray node for our sun, and we are going to grab some blue values here. And we have another gray node at the end. We might as well brighten this as well, and a second gray node. So this second gray node, we can see that removes some of this blue, so we might as well get rid of this. And let's take a look at the final result that we have so far. All right, and let's preview some other frames. Probably this, we removed too much of the thickness of the smoke. Let's go back to our grade and let's preview the alpha here. Yeah, this is too dark now, so let's bring this back slightly. So we do want the snow to obscure our character. Do something like this, and let's preview the result now. All right, so here we can see it on this frame as well, but maybe this is still too much. Let's go to our grade, just decrease the gamma. And let's take a look at our AOVs here. Let's maybe just separate these one by one and see exactly what each of these provide. I'll bring in the second one, and probably this needs a little bit more contrast. Okay, and our third one, we can maybe bring in our sun for this third one a lot more. So I think this looks a lot better now. We really want this to be rather bright. Okay, so this will be fine and we can move forward. For our eyes, this will be super simple. Let's just look at the final result and let's find our gray node which introduces the green. So it's going to be this one over here after the multiply, and I'm just gonna reduce the red and just increase the blue. Let's do something like this, bring in a lot of blue, and I can also use this multiply value to push the overall values a lot more so we get our glow back. And let's take a look at the glow. Let's maybe increase the intensity here. Let's take a look at the flare result. So for this gray node, we can see that the convolve result looks pretty good, but this gray node is pushing out the blue. So we can just bring this back and also increase the multiply here. So if I look at the result, this is pretty much what we can do for the eyes. So I think this looks all right. Let's move forward with our dust. Let's take a look at how it looks right now. And in our previous comp, we created this dark layer of dust. So this works for a sandstorm. But for our blizzard, we can remove this entirely and just focus on our particles as they are. We are only going to use the plus operation. If I look at the grade node, so the result as it is, we are going to need to bring in the color here for our snow. And let's take a look. So already this is looking a lot better. We might need to adjust this gain probably. And because we brighten the snow particles quite a lot, we can soften this result a little bit if we add a motion blur before our grading. So I'm just gonna place a motion blur here, and the default values are rather high. So I'm just gonna set the shutter time here to maybe 0.3, and I'm also going to increase the samples to a value of 7. So if I look at the result with the grade, if I turn this on and off, we can see that this will help to smooth out everything a lot better. Let's take a look at the final comp, and maybe the motion blur is still too aggressive. Let's use a 0.2 shutter time. So something like this. And for our grade node, let's also drop a second grade node and push in a little bit of blue values for this layer as well. And I'm pretty fine with this for the most part. I do want to darken this layer around our character, so we can press O in our comp and just simply do a quick mask around the character. Let's take a look at the result. Press A. I'll drop a blur node with B, and I'm just going to feather this out and just increase the size by quite a lot. So maybe something like 400. And then for our snow, let's drop another gray node, use this as our mask, and let's just drop down the gain here and let's preview the result. And press A to go back to the RGB view. So let's decrease this, and we can see with this gray node, we isolate this part that's right in front of our character. So I don't really want to obscure our character too much. Let's maybe go back here and let's just set this to a value of 0.5. So our snow will be 50% more transparent right in front of our character. And one final thing that I want to do with the snow particles is add a little bit of highlights. So I'm just going to drop down a grade and point to our render. And with this gray node, I'm going to reduce the gamma and increase the gain. So we just get, we kind of isolate some of these particles. Maybe I want to push in a little bit more gain. So I'm just going to use the multiply values here. And let's also do a saturation to get rid of this brown color. So I'll set this to 0. And I'm just going to merge this on top. And this is without the motion blur. So let's set this to plus. And as a result, if I take a look here, if I disable this, we can see now that some of these snow particles will have a little bit of highlight to them. So this will help us to achieve a little bit more variation. And we might want to increase the gamma here slightly. Okay, this is too much, but something like this will be fine. And this is pretty much our comp. After this, we have another gray node, which really in this case brightens up everything way too much. So I'm just gonna reduce this slightly. And we can choose to keep the defocus or not. In this case, I chose to get rid of the defocus. And we also have this dirt texture that's on top of everything. So for this, all we have to do is just go to the last gray node here and push all of the values in the blue ranges. So we can take a look at the result. And finally, we have our transform, which pushes the render down a little bit. We have this chromatic spin effect, so you can also choose to keep this or not. Finally, we also have the vignette node. Now, in this case, it looks pretty good with the dark version, but what I did instead was use coloring here. So I just increase this and push this towards white, and then I just decrease the amount. So we can achieve a sort of focusing around our character by brightening the edges of our comp instead of darkening them. And this will be up to you if you want to darken the edges or brighten them or not use any at all. And then finally, we have a final gray node over everything. Maybe this is also pushing the values too much, so I might disable this, and a crop to get our anamorphic display, so 2.35 and 1. And this is basically it. We can preview some other frames and see how everything is looking, but for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this. And we can see how quickly we can achieve a vastly different result. So this is also a good thing to know how to do all of this, because in an R&D setting, in a studio workflow, you can very easily create iterations and variations on any given shot. So hopefully this gave you a little bit more insight into why compositing is very powerful and why it's a very useful skill to have. And this was it for this lesson, so hopefully we'll see each other again in a new course.